evening, members of the public, council and staff. Thank you very much for being out here. It's a really good turnout tonight. It's really good to see. We'll start this evening's meeting, and just before we get going, just take a moment to talk about the town of Innisfil and our response to what is now a pandemic as of today. The COVID-19. So unless you've been living under a rock, I'm sure you've heard all about it. So just to let you know that we are working closely with our partners, both the Innisfil Emergency Operations Center that also works closely with Simcoe County. We are working very closely with the Simcoe-Muskoka District Health Unit. I actually sit on that board. And of course, we take direction from the Ontario Medical Officer of Health, Dr. David Williams. So we're getting our information from those sources and working through processes in-house. We would continue to drive you to those official sources for your information and not social media in order to make sure that that you're doing what's best for what your family and your loved ones and those that might be more vulnerable to this particular illness. So I would ask you at this point, if you have a cell phone or another electronic device, if you'd please set it to silent or vibrate, and so that you can deal with it in the hallway should you need to. Public comments made during this meeting are both audio and video recorded, and I would take a moment to welcome all of those who are at home and watching on live stream. And thank you for being with us as well. All of these comments are recorded and will be retained in according to the town's retention bylaw. And if you need more information about that bylaw and how it works, you can get that information from the town clerk. So we'll start with item number 2, which is open forum. Our open forum tonight is an opportunity for people to say a few words about items that are on the agenda this evening, and let council share your wisdom with us prior to us debating those items, as we will as we go through the evening. Now we have 5 items. So if I could ask everyone to keep the items fairly concise, that would be much appreciated. And the first one is William Norris, and it's regarding the short-term rental report that's on council tonight. Mr. Norrie? I'm sorry, you're not hearing me properly. I should be speaking into my mic better. You want to speak to open forum about the short-term rental accommodation? Yes, come forward, please. Yeah. Yes, about just about 2 minutes. If you can keep your message concise.
Well, this is my favorite place to be in speaking public. But I have an objection to the Airbnb because really it's a revolving door for people who rent the Airbnb. They come in every 2-3 days, and it just keeps going on and on all through the summer. And we have 48 homes in there that are registered right away. And of those 48, we are called dominant owners. And the person who does own it, as far as I've been told, is a servient owner. But we have a right-of-way, which is a legal grant by her to have those, to occupy, use and enjoy those lands. Now these people who are in there, they don't leave the property, the lakefront property, as it was before they arrived there. It's just not the same because they don't clean up. Now, this property is advertised online, and the incentive to rent this property is the beachfront or the lakefront that we have as dominant owners. That's for our private use, not for other people who rent. Now, this is just a small portion of what could be if our Airbnb is allowed to continue. This could grow. And what would prevent a person such as myself or any other individual who has the 48 instruments or right-of-ways from renting a room, if they have an extra bathroom, use the kitchen, so it could explode. Anybody could make extra money, and that's what it's all about, making extra money. And they could use this land, lakefront property, anytime they wanted, and it would become nothing more than a public park. And it's not what it was intended to be. It was intended to be for our use and our enjoyment, the 48 homes that do have the right of way, an easement, as I understand it, over that property. Now, there is a problem with that property, but that's not to do with what we're talking about tonight.
Thank you very much for those comments. We do have a report on tonight, but there is no decision on the report tonight. So I would invite you to stay tuned as we work our way through this challenging process.
Okay, thank you, and I'm going to get a hearing aid next week.
I think it's my fault. I'm not talking into the mic. Next on the list is Ross Pittock regarding supporting the motion for D2.
Good evening, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor, councillors, staff, public. We just, at the Innisfil District Association, we support item 10.2, the notice of motion by Councillor Rob Nickel. And we encourage council to look deeply at the continued need for conservation authorities to fulfill their mandate in our community. I'm just going to read you a very short little snippet from a letter from Ontario Nature and Environmental Defence and the Canadian Environmental Law Association regarding this matter. Today, conservation authorities provide a much valued bridge across municipal boundaries to understand and address environmental concerns such as flooding. Because they operate at the watershed level, they are ideally positioned to encourage collaborative strategies in decision making. The Flood Advisor's report showed strong support for conservation authority model in protecting Ontario from impacts of climate change. Their role in flood mapping, hazard assessment, monitoring are critical to protecting life and property. This model only works, however, if conservation authorities have necessary regulatory powers, appropriate staffing, and adequate funding to intervene in planning decisions and development applications. Their vital role in land use planning and permitting must be retained to ensure that development does not put communities at risk from flooding and other climate change impacts through loss of wetlands, woodlands, and farmlands. So, for reasons stated there, we ask that council support the motion this evening by Councillor Nickel.
Thank you, Mr. Pittock. Next is Deborah McGrath, and it's also item 10.2. I'm sorry, I said D2.
Thank you, Your Worship. On behalf of the IDA, I'm here to support this motion and implore Council to consider the impact CAs, or conservation authorities, have on our community. Again, from Ontario Nature, some highlights I'd like you to consider this evening, namely that conservation authorities are grassroots organizations that have a solid track record in responding innovatively, something Innisfil knows a lot about, and effectively to community needs. The government should enhance, not limit their roles and effectiveness. Additionally, CAs play a key role in delivering community projects in partnership with municipalities and local organizations, providing on-the-ground expertise. CAs partner with local environmental and conservation groups, farmers, and their communities to deliver regionally significant projects, including, and we've seen this in Innisfil, rehabilitating natural heritage, implementing agricultural best practices, and restoring or creating wetlands, something very important for the upcoming mobility orbit. They often provide match funding, in addition to on-the-ground expertise. Finally, as very few municipalities have the staff capacity and expertise to deal with natural heritage planning, and CAs are filling this role right now, in most cases at the direction of municipalities according to negotiated MOUs or memorandums of understanding. Removing CAs from this role will not increase efficiencies. Someone will still need to do the work and assume the responsibility of planning and permitting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McGrath. Next is Mr. Sandy Agnew, and it's also item 10.2.
Good evening, Mayor and Deputy Mayor and Council. I'm with the Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition, and I want to speak supporting the motion 10.2. I guess the only point that I really want to make is that if we hope to see rehabilitation of Lake Simcoe and restoration of a healthy ecosystem, we're not going to do it without a strong Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority. They're the ones coordinating it. They're the ones that are going to make it happen. And if they don't have the funds and the authority to do it, it ain't going to happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Agnew. I can see Mr. Walters over there with a big smile on his face. He's cheering. And I'd ask all of you who are here advocating for conservation authorities this evening to advocate also to your federal government for the Lake Simcoe Lake Cleanup Fund to be reinstated. And finally, the last item tonight is Piotr Chinka. Thank you, I apologize. And it's also regarding short-term rental accommodations.
Yes, good evening, Mayor. Good evening, members of council. I would like to shed a light on the safety aspect of the short accommodation rentals. You know, there's the idea of that everything has its place, like zoning have its necessity to be, and residential zoning has its needs because families can enjoy the peace of mind, raising children, grandchildren, where commercial zoning is to actually do the business where everybody goes there and do the business. In my opinion, short rental accommodations have no places in small, especially small residential areas, neighborhoods where we enjoy peace. Like the previous speaker said about that, there's a turnover of new people. One day I went to the beach that we enjoy, and there was like 7 or 8 young males playing. They were really, mean looking, just waiting when we can leave so they can still keep playing. And they left a mess, dig holes in the ground and stuff like that. One of our friends found drugs left over, on a picnic table on a beach. They walk in, groups, drinking beer on the street. It's really more like a, resort kind of a thing where they would be, allowed to, walk out and enjoy it, where this is neighborhood where we live, where we have children. Like my children don't need to see these things going on. So in my opinion, if somebody, is purchasing additional house, not the one they live in, just the next house, and rent it to make income, that's a business that should be in, business zoning area, right? Not residential. And lastly, when you buy a house and this is your investment, things like that actually, devastate the final, the figures on the house. Like resale value goes down. That's what I mean, right? So that's one thing. Also, yeah, I lost the point. I was saying something, but that, you get the idea, right? That this is really, like I can't let my daughter walk the dog anymore because of that. There's like, groups of people going that we don't know them. Like if there's somebody who we know who lives next door, you're not afraid, people. Now it's not safe really. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That concludes the items in open forum this evening. So next I would ask that, that staff approve the agenda. We have had an additional item. It's a notice of motion for Councillor Ices that's been added to the agenda. And, but other than that, the agenda as was printed and has been online for a week. A mover and a seconder for that agenda approval is Councillor Van Berkel and Councillor Fowler. All those in favor? That's carried. Next is I'm asked any members of council who had disclosed pecuniary interest to please do so now or when they realize that they should be doing so. And next is item 5, and it's our presentations. Our first presentation this evening is from the Community Fundraising Coordinator, or actually it's not, it's from the Fundraising Committee, and it's regarding the Innisfil Community Foundation granting update. And so I'm pleased to welcome, are we both doing it? Ms. Smith and Ms. Rosardo, whenever you're ready. Thank you so much for being here.
Good evening, Mayor Dolan, Deputy Mayor Davidson, council and staff. I'm Sandra Rosardo. I am the chair of the Innisfil Community Foundation Board of Directors, and I'm excited to be here tonight to share some exciting plans about the foundation's first round of grants. The vice chair of the board, Howard Courtney, and president, Ann Kell, are unable to attend tonight and share their regrets. But it's my pleasure to introduce you to our newest director and treasurer, Ann Smith. Anne is an active member of the community and has already been a valuable member of the foundation team, bringing insight and financial governance from her former role as president of National Insurance Agency. Before we share our plan, we want to take this opportunity to thank this council and the councils before you who have made Innisfil Community Foundation possible. Your foresight to establish the Innisfil Community Foundation is unique for a municipality, and your commitment to support it over the next few years is unprecedented. Thank you for your understanding, the important work that the community groups and nonprofit organizations are doing to help support our neighbors, friends, and loved ones here in Innisfil. The image on the screen says, "Do something great." We know through your actions that you already have, and we are excited to take it from here.
Last fall, we held 2 community conversations sessions with a total of 22 participants. These were frank and honest conversations about the challenges and opportunities here in Innisfil. We learned that our community wants more opportunities to learn what each other are doing and to build from our collective strengths. We are proud to say that a connection was made at one of these tables that has already fostered a new partnership between 2 organizations without any granting. This is part of the Foundation's guiding principles to create opportunities for connection and support beyond the check. We also learned that the top issues facing Innisfil right now are poverty, food security, housing, and social isolation. We listened to what our community said and have determined that these areas will be our focus for 2020. Organizations addressing these issues will be given preference for this initial granting period.
We want to highlight one key piece of granting criteria because it is a big change from the town's previous granting program. As a registered charitable organization, Innisfil Community Foundation must follow Canada Revenue Agency rules. This means that grant recipients must be a registered charity or have formally partnered with a registered charity on the grant. Although we must follow these rules, we also want to make it easy for organizations to assess the funds they need. That's why we are sharing this information now, so that community organizations can begin thinking of potential partnerships before the grant period opens. We encourage organizations to reach out to each other, and we are also here to give guidance to organizations seeking partnerships within the community.
We'd like to share a few key dates here tonight, and we'll be spending the next few weeks reaching out to community groups with this information. Grant applications will open on Wednesday, April the 1st. On Tuesday, April the 7th, we are hosting 2 grant workshops at the Idea Lab and Library in Alcona, one afternoon session from 3 to 5 p.m. and one evening session from 6 to 8 p.m., where we will go through the application process, our requirements and responsibilities as a charitable foundation, and the responsibilities of grant seekers. Applications will close on Monday, April 27th, after which we, the board, will review and narrow it down to up to 6 finalists. We do want to note that if an organization applies and is not selected, there will be more opportunities to receive grants later this year. In May, decisions will be reported back to the applicants, finalists will be made public, and the online voting will begin.
Mark your calendars because we are throwing a grant reception on Thursday, June the 4th. Our partners at OLG and Georgian Downs are generously providing us with the venue. It will be a Dragon's Den style event where finalists will present their cases before a panel of local celebrity judges. The event audience will also have the opportunity to participate in awarding a portion of the funds. We are excited to grant up to $50,000 to the community organizations at this event, with a bonus $2,500 going to the People's Choice Award up for grabs. We think this is a wonderful way to introduce the Innisfil Community Foundation while showcasing some of the organizations making a difference here in town.
All of the criteria and key date information that we just shared can be found at getinvolvedinnisfil.ca/grants. Please take the opportunity to review the information on the website, and if your organization doesn't have a charitable status, don't let that be a barrier. Excuse me. Reach out to us and we'll work with you to help you find partnerships. Thank you again for your support and backing of this very exciting opportunity for our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies. That's very exciting. I would ask council and staff if they have any questions or comments. Councillor Sadi.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for your presentation. It's very exciting, and I like the opportunity that you will connect organizations because, you know, with if they don't have a charitable status, because many who are just starting up and struggling or have been there for years, we have so many good organizations in the community. So I like the fact that you're willing to help them and to encourage them to step forward. And it sounds like an exciting night. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Davidson.
Thank you, Worship. I appreciate the presentation. I'm not overly taken with it. My biggest concern is the fact, like Councillor Sadi said, there are many smaller groups that used to receive money from the charity Spirit of the Community that don't have the know-how or the charitable status. And trust me, I've been through the charitable status situation. It's not an easy thing to apply for. It's very expensive. It also involves getting an audit done every year on that particular organization, which would cost thousands of dollars. So instead of money really going to the cause, it's going to bureaucracy to pay to become a member of charitable status. It's money going towards the audit annually. Also, accounting practices have to be kept up full time. So instead of that $5,000 going directly to the group of people, whether it be hockey or Africa or pumps we're putting somewhere, wells we're building, a lot of that money that we used to give out is now going to bureaucracy to pay for bureaucracy.
Ms. Rosardo?
What we found is when we did these workshops that there was similarities between a lot of organizations. And what we found is that instead of granting money out to several different organizations, if we can combine them and together they can be stronger, and as opposed to always having the same duplications in these grants or in the organizations. For instance, as an example, there was a group who were looking for a place to gather the teenagers, and there was another group who had a space that was empty, was willing to give it to them. So things like this have been happening behind the scenes, and what we find is that sometimes throwing money isn't always the best solution. So this is a better way of doing it, of combining different groups out there, because there are many of them, and avoiding some of the duplicity in doing and having all these different groups.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I understand what you're saying, and I know how groups should connect with each other. However, Innisfil is spread out amongst many, many communities at different ends of the town, and for those communities and those organizations to connect can be very difficult. I just know that bureaucracy gets in the way of receiving some of this money that should go 100% to the residents of Innisfil to benefit the residents of Innisfil, not for bureaucracy. And this was my hesitation when we voted on this prior to letting this become what it's become now, because I saw it becoming bureaucratic. It seems to be becoming that way. Now, on your website, I haven't checked it out yet, but I would like to see a step-by-step approach to these small organizations throughout all of Innisfil as how they can connect without paying a dollar. Because as soon as it costs them money, they're going to step back from it. So let's see how you bring up your website, that for these groups who are not registered charities, how they can receive money or get an application through the process, or how they connect with somebody without costing them a nickel. Because that is part of the problem with small groups that come before us from schools who asked us to give some money for this and give some money for that cause. And they were great causes, but there were maybe $500 or $700 or $350. I don't see that happening anymore. And this show at the slots, to me, it's a little bit of grandstanding. I don't like that kind of stuff. And hopefully they're donating that evening, because hopefully it's not costing this organization, this group, granting organization any money to have that event.
Thank you. I just start by saying that you remember, Council, we still have our Innisfil Council discretionary fund for items like that we were talking before, and this was a direction we gave to Council. Council made this decision to go in this direction, but I'll ask Mr. Rayner to speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to the Deputy Mayor. So on the Get Involved website, I encourage Council to take a look at that. It does set out very clearly what criteria needs to be met, what the timelines are, and then the Foundation is also having a series of workshops to help walk those organizations through step by step. This process has been born out of the consultation that the Foundation itself has done to try to achieve that. And I just don't want I just want to make sure that we're focused in on the social solutions granting, which is the objective that the Foundation has set to address poverty, food security, housing, and social isolation. And I know this council has been very vocal about trying to address some of those social challenges that we have, recognizing that other levels of government have jurisdictional responsibility for a lot of those issues. But rather than sit back and wait for other levels of government who are very busy, but who may not be providing those local services here in Innisfil, Council had the wisdom to create the Foundation, and the Board of Directors and their Executive Director have put this program together to address social solutions grants, which is a very exciting and innovative approach to community foundations here in Innisfil.
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Mayor. I thank you very much for the presentation. My concern is along the same lines we've been talking about, is about individuals. And the only reason I'm a bit concerned is because I've had a very, very energetic student from Nantyre come to me with a really good project, and I did forward her to the Foundation, plus Mayor Dolan, in terms of a way to help her out. I would hope that in these workshops, and I think it can inspire our youth, is part of those workshops which would help them realize the projects they want to do. How can they go about their individual projects? I'm not too sure when that they can partner with the schools as their charitable organization, but show them a pathway forward so they don't feel dashed by the Foundation that we created. I know the town can help them out with our money, but I just hope that in that workshop there's a way that we can energize our youth to get them on a social footpath to bettering our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I just wanted to first clarify that it is a different direction, and please don't feel that we aren't behind you, because we chose to take this direction as a council, and we know how much time and effort you have taken out of your personal lives, all of you, to volunteer to be on this foundation. You all have very busy businesses and lives, and we appreciate that you're volunteering your time to make Innisfil a better place, and that you're looking at the big picture things. What my council colleagues are talking about are the smaller things that we have supported in the past, and will continue to support. I believe the student that Councillor Waters is talking about, we partnered with the library for some vinyl cutting for some work she wanted to do at Nantar Shores. We've supported other groups in the past through our council discretionary fund, which this council has done. Just a couple weeks ago, I think we granted funding to the Innisfil Garden Club, which was funds that would allow them to use the Churchill Community Center for their meetings. So we're still doing those things, but this is leaps beyond that, and I think is meant to make a difference on a bigger picture. What I really liked was the comments. I wrote down support behind the check. And I think that's really important. It's one thing to give an organization a check. It's another thing to be there for them, to help them partner with other groups, make sure there isn't duplicate programs going on in town, and making sure that every cent of that money is going to the cause it's meant to. So for that, I very much appreciate you being here tonight and giving us this update for the foundation. Seeing no other comments, I'll ask for the recommendation that the Innisfil Community Foundation granting update be received as information, and that's moved by Councillor Asadi and seconded by Councillor Payne. All those in favor? Those opposed? That's carried. Thank you. So our next delegation is from Ross Pittock, Innisfil District Association, in collaboration with the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition. Welcome.
Well, we're just here tonight to remind you that the plan is up for review shortly by the province. And we just want to give a very, very brief overview of the plan. The plan is a comprehensive plan to protect and restore the ecological health of Lake Simcoe and its watershed and address long-term environmental issues. And the plan helps to address climate change issues, environmental issues that will affect the municipality as well. I'm going to start right away with the ask. The role that the Municipal Council can play is encouraging your provincial colleagues to ensure that this plan remains in place and is strengthened. And in this presentation, on your copy, there is a resolution, and we'd like to ask Council to sign on to that resolution that supports the strengthening of the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. Yeah, thank you. So just a couple of points why we should care about Lake Simcoe and phosphorus pollution and sources. We'll go through all these things. First of all, tourism to the watershed is about $420 million a year to the local economy. Just the value of the ecosystem is almost $1 billion in carbon storage, water storage, flood prevention, filtration, climate change regulation, shade, prevention of soil erosion. Oops, there we go. And the phosphorus levels lead to algal growth in the lakes. And the sources of phosphorus are about 31% from urban runoff and stormwater, 27% from atmospheric sources, and 25% from rural and agricultural. Those are the three big ones where we're getting our phosphorus from. And the plan was, the act was enacted December 2008 with the support of 35 organizations around the lake, of which the IDA was one. You can see the graph there. The goal for target, the reduction of phosphorus is down to 44 tons a year, and we're still above that. And if we continue on a path of doing nothing, it could go as high as 94 tons per year. What was strengthened under the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan? Natural heritage and hydrologic feature protection, mandatory septic inspections within 100 meters of water features, protection for smaller wetlands, tougher sewage treatment plant phosphorus caps, mandatory inclusion of sub-watershed plans in the official plans, better in science and monitoring by the Science Committee, the Lake Simcoe Science Committee, and the Lake Simcoe Coordinating Committee. Also funding of up to $20 million from the province, improved stormwater management guidelines, and it also enabled the Lake Simcoe Phosphorate Offset Program and phosphorus reduction strategies. Similar graph to the previous one, you can see 2014-15, which I understand is the most recent set of data that we've got. It looks like we're sitting at about 70 tons of phosphorus going into the lake. The goal is 44. Two main goals of the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. One is to achieve 40% natural coverage around the Lake Simcoe watershed, and 44 and to maintain at 44 tons of phosphorus loading. Currently, the goal is 40%. We have about 35% of natural coverage right now. There's been some slight losses of forest cover occurring. On the watershed map, you can see that we have a couple of categories. The green category means best protected, and 21% is best protected, 41% is somewhat protected. And best protected would be areas that have things that are supported by the provincial government that enable those things to be protected. The impacts of growth, significant phosphorus loading will occur from development, and we need to find a way to offset that in some way. Municipal actions for protecting nature: use and enforce an ambitious tree cover bylaw, increase naturalization of public space, and proactively protect wetlands. Again, municipal actions: you can enforce sediment and erosion bylaws, continually improve stormwater management, and assist on low-impact development. And I know the town is doing these things. The planners are doing these things. In terms of water conservation and reuse is something that can be done and maintain or lower the sewage treatment plant loads. And going forward, just a couple of points. In terms of the review, we'd like to see sector-specific interim targets to achieve 44 tons of phosphorus and monitor this, achieve the 40% of watershed green space, add the Lake Simcoe climate change adaptation strategy policies to the protection plan. That's an Ontario program in order to reduce phosphorus loads, mitigate the impacts of climate change. Maintain the nutrient load caps on sewage treatment plants. Provide a minimum of $10 million for the reboot of the phosphorus reduction strategy. Use a cost-benefit approach to prioritizing phosphorus reduction. Strengthen stormwater and development policies to bring down sedimentation and phosphorus loads. And also to partner with First Nations when discussing these things and working through these things. Also working with businesses and the public, and I know the town does this frequently, collaborating with the public, with businesses to have locally driven stewardship activities, try to bring down salt levels on the roads, and update the roles of the Lake Simcoe Coordinating Committee, the Lake Simcoe Science Committee, and of course, the conservation authorities. And the model council resolution is here. I'll just read the gist of it in the center. The town of Innisfil calls on the Ontario government to demonstrate its commitment to clean water and protecting what matters most in the provincial statutory review of Lake Simcoe Protection Plan by ensuring that provisions in the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan that protect water quality are not weakened, and that policies protecting natural heritage be strengthened in order to meet the target of the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. And also there's a paragraph there about working with First Nations in cooperation. Anything that you...
Kevin said I could piggyback on this delegation. And I always do what Kevin says. I wanted to add to this with a current and actually very exciting report that was fresh off the press. February 19th, in a letter to the town of Innisfil, the Lake Simcoe Watch issued a report. If you haven't already seen it, I have some copies here. Perhaps Kevin or Patty would like to take some copies for council. There's an extra one here for staff. And we've got some Lake Simcoe Protection Plan correspondence as well. The IDA, as you may not know, is one of many member agencies for Lake Simcoe Watch. And this report, and that was quite a laundry list, this report outlines how we can achieve the LSPP phosphorus target by 2026. The report is colorful and interesting and succinct because that was, as I say, quite a laundry list. How do we get there? This is one of the many strategies, and it's a hard strategy that was created by the Lake Simcoe Science Committee. Here's our ask. The IDA hopes that the town of Innisfil will properly review the LSW report you now have in your hot little hands and provide responses to their 4 questions, just 4 questions, by April the 30th. Finally, as you may know, our neighbors to the north, Barrie General Council, passed a resolution on Monday night to call on the Ontario government to review the Lake Simcoe Protection Act of 2008. As it said, the province must ensure water protection provisions and policies protecting natural heritage, and they must be strengthened. So tonight we're here to present Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition data, Lake Simcoe Watch Coalition data. Ross and I are not scientists, but we are privileged to work alongside many organizations that present some pretty compelling data. Bedtime reading for tonight. We'd like to hear your answers. Remember, the deadline is April 30th for the Lake Simcoe Watch report. Thank you for your time. Any questions?
Thank you very much to both of you. Questions or comments? Deputy Mayor Davidson.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation. And as you know, I've been involved with the Lake Simcoe Foundation, conservation, all of them since the very beginning. I think I had a conversation with the CEO from the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority a few weeks ago. And the last time the Protection Act was reviewed, if I'm correct, was, I'm going to say 30 years ago. And at that time, we were dealing with acid rain when all this started. So it has changed. And a suggestion was made to me that maybe the municipalities, the counties, the regions surrounding Lake Simcoe could start to get together to look at what our plans are for Lake Simcoe, not just for 5 years from now to 2026, 6 years, maybe for the next 30 years. Because I know that I've been bugging our Member of Parliament for that $40 million to help continue with the protection of Lake Simcoe to move forward. But there's no point doing that if we're not going to protect the lake at the local levels or the municipal level, county levels or whatever we're doing. So I think Mr. Walters is quite aware of my concerns that I've brought forward. And so I thank you for this presentation tonight, because I think it's time again to bring attention to the concerns that are going to be facing Lake Simcoe in the very near future that we need to step on now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank you for your presentation, but what I most want to say is I think it's important for organizations like yourselves to hold not only councils feet to the fire, but also conservation authorities and other organizations in the province. So I appreciate the report. I appreciate the information that we've received tonight, and I encourage you to continue doing what you're doing, because it's it's important for 2 reasons. One, it holds our feet to the fire, but it also is an educational piece, and it gets the community involved in caring about Lake Simcoe. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was going to save this question maybe for Mike later on, but my question is about phosphorus. As a farmer, we apply phosphorus because it's an essential nutrient to our crops. And so my question is, how do we measure phosphorus going into the lake? Because phosphorus is such a dynamic
We've
nutrient.
had this discussion quite a few times, and again, we're not the scientists doing the research, we're just basically the messengers, but in the discussions, there's atmospheric phosphorus coming from wind and stuff onto the lake, there's phosphorus coming from the rivers, and it is challenging to measure that because it's coming from several sources, and as I was reading, 27% is coming from the atmosphere. As far as the science, I can't answer that question. You'd have to defer to Miss Malcolmson and her team from the university and see what they say.
Or perhaps Mr. Walters.
Or, yeah, maybe Mr. Walters could answer that later.
I will pose that question to him as well.
Yeah.
I guess the one thing as a farmer, and of course I turn to the first page and it's on agriculture, and it talks about best management practices. And the one thing that I think is missed in a lot of these discussions is soil quality and soil management. Like as a farmer, you've spelled it out here perfectly. 28 to 95%. That's the range of effectiveness best management practices can have. And if there was just a way to focus on farmers and to adopt the practices that limit the loss of phosphorus, I think you multiply that out by acres and amounts. That's kind of the best bang for the effort, and I feel that's lacking in a lot of these discussions, the importance of soil. So that would be my comment.
And I think my response, Councillor Ices, would be to address that with Ontario Nature, with conservation authorities, with the scientists who created these reports. We are, as Ross said, the messengers. We wish we could answer these questions. We work alongside them and are constantly in awe of the amount of information that comes forward. And we appreciate Council's questions and Councillor Ises' specific question about phosphorus. Appreciate it.
Councillor Nicol.
Thank you, Worship. Obviously, we've just received a lot of information here, and I'm just doing the math quickly. And 83% of the phosphorus load is coming from stormwater runoff, rural agricultural sources, and the atmospheric disposition, the dust and everything. So, when the resolution comes in, I wonder if I do have a seconder, if we might consider referring this to staff, this whole recommendation, to consider drafting an Innisfil resolution. The one that's on the screen right now is a bit much, but I wonder if it might have an appetite to send this back to staff to consider an Innisfil response. Seconded by Councillor Van Berkel once it comes up.
So we have a resolution on the floor to receive the recommendation and send it to staff for report back. And that's moved by Councillor Nicol and seconded by Councillor Van Berkel. So can we have any further discussion on the recommendation? Councillor Waters?
What type of information are we going to be looking for from staff in terms of, are we looking just to reword what they've provided to us? Okay, that's good, thank you.
Thank you, and I think it would be good to run it past the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority as well to make sure that the information is accurate. And I would ask that, Mr. Clerk, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. So just to be clear on what staff should be doing with that, to draft a motion for council's consideration based on the one provided here. Okay.
Thank you. And I'll just make a couple of comments. The sodium issue I know is one that's become more of an issue over time, and I would suggest maybe perhaps it's not far from beating phosphorus in the issue in Lake Simcoe. We know even in our area we have issues contributing areas for sodium, so that's something we have to look at. But I also wanted to point out that tonight on our agenda, a later staff report, we're having a report on a advanced sedimentation pilot project that we've received funding through from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So we're really excited about that. We've partnered with Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority, with LID development. So we have a long history of caring for our lake here. The former chair of the Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund, when there was one, was actually a member of our council. So we were the first ones to form a meeting of the mayors of the shoreline of Lake Simcoe to come up with remediation of shoreline issues. So we will always be the champion of Lake Simcoe here, and we do appreciate you being here with us today.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Now, I'd ask everybody with the motion on the floor, the motion on the floor is on the screen, and it's duly moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Next, this is the night for Lake Simcoe. So next we would invite the CAO of the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority, Mike Walters. Mr. Walters, when budget time came around and you were here to ask us for money, I think you were a little under weather that night, so you sent an alternate. So we're happy to have you here tonight. One of the reasons was so that you could hear the presentation. Well, there's two reasons. First of all, last meeting, the deputy mayor made a notice of motion that he wanted to, we wanted to learn more about where we were in the Lake Simcoe and as far as its strategy, and also for you to give us any comments on the presentation that you'd heard prior.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor, members of council, staff, and members of the audience. It's always my pleasure to come to Innisfil. I do apologize I missed the budget meeting. If this is my penance, I'm more than happy to pay it because, as I said, I'm always happy to be here. I want to remind everyone that the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan is a provincial initiative. We're a component of it, and I'm going to go through this based on our lens as a conservation authority. So just some quick watershed facts, 35 rivers and creeks, over 400 million recreation, 420 as you saw. It's a source of drinking water for 9 communities. We have waste assimilation. There's 15 sewage treatment plants in our watershed. 7 discharge directly into Lake Simcoe. The other 8 discharge into rivers and streams that eventually drain in. It's an extremely important natural heritage feature, and it's also a designated growth area. So we have growth occurring within the watershed. Our job as a conservation authority is to mitigate the impacts of that growth and make sure that the lake remains healthy for future generations. So there's a long history of management with Lake Simcoe, and I'm happy to say I haven't been here for all of it, but I've been here for a big chunk of it. In the 70s, actually, because of the crash of the cold-water fishery, a group of counselors, it started in Georgina and then spread across the lake, got together, and we have the Lake Simcoe Couchiching Studies. That evolved into the Lake Simcoe Environmental Management Strategy, and then there was an implementation program once Cabinet approved the strategy results. That has since evolved into the Lake Simcoe Protection Act in 2008 and the actual development of the plan in 2009. The plan itself, it's already been mentioned, restore aquatic life, improve water quality, maintain water quantity, protect and rehabilitate natural heritage features, and it did look at other threats. It recognizes that this is a watershed. It's very much a changing watershed, and as such, there's going to be new stressors that come our way. And one of the most important things is to use that adaptive management approach for watershed management. So that means we're always vigilant, looking for the next problem coming along. The plan itself is 117 policies, 4 categories. I won't go through them all. Designated policies you must do. The other ones are more strategic, which are nice to do. There's some for monitoring, and there's to have regard for. Our municipalities had 34 of those 117 recommendations that they had to undertake. We only had 3, but we were actually about 70 of the 80 policies that were assigned to provincial agencies to lead. We were a partner and a part of. So we have been very much part of the work going forward. I've got to commend our municipalities. You've done an excellent job on implementing recommendations with the support of us and others. Specifically, there are some areas that were identified within the plan for municipalities. They've been touched on in the previous presentation: wastewater and stormwater policies, shoreline management, the natural heritage protection policies, and sub-watershed plans. And what I'd like to do is just spend a bit of time looking at what we've done within each of those areas. So under wastewater and water conservation, all sewage treatment plants, wastewater pollution control facilities in our watershed have the most stringent guidelines of any plants in the province. We have the best phosphorus control. bar none. Probably the best plant right now in the whole country is in Keswick, which is an enhanced membrane filtration. It removes almost all the phosphorus. I know our municipalities, and through source water protection, there is water conservation. We're all working to reduce the impact on potable water. And in partnership with us, our municipalities have completed 610 septic system retrofits, and 807 drinking water wells have been fixed. And this is just within the last 5-6 years. Stormwater is another big one that municipalities have embraced. We've always had stormwater policies. In June of 2016, we have our own policies within this watershed that were completed in collaboration with the build industry, our member municipalities, and the province. And actually, they are more stringent than the current provincial guidelines. They require site control of essentially 25 millimeters or almost 1 inch of rainfall on the site. They require things like low impact development because you have to maintain water balance, and the only way you can do that is by putting some of that water back in the ground. So we are the only conservation authority, the only watershed in all of Ontario that have those guidelines currently. But the province is looking at taking those guidelines, changing them, and then extrapolating them out to the rest of the province, and we're hoping that'll happen this year. So making sure it's built right the first time is happening. We're doing everything possible to try to control stormwater at the source, at the site. We also have to fix what's broken, and there's a lot of development that occurred prior to these guidelines coming into place. And we've been undertaking stormwater retrofits now for almost 10 years. They're very expensive projects, they're very large projects. So we've completed 78, and I'm happy to say we have 14 underway. And we're seeing an acceleration in the completion of these types of projects because of the offset program. And this phosphorus offset program is with the build industry once again. It's generating runoff through new growth to fix the problems that exist in the past. And so as that money comes available, we're looking at projects, and we're undertaking those retrofits to control uncontrolled urban areas across the watershed. And you're gonna see a lot more of that happening in the future. As I said, we have 14 underway this year, and we're not actually through. That's just what we have on the books right now. There's a number of projects that are still being proposed. Shoreline management. Shoreline is one of the most important parts of the lake. It's where the people actually meet the lake, and it's where all the recreation happens. Our shoreline has taken a bit of a beating in the past. There is a lot of plan review for development along shoreline. You have our regulation, you have other very innovative approaches, and I commend the town for developing our shore, and you're absolutely right, Mayor Dolan. It was great to see this municipality step up and take the lead with the protection of shoreline. MNRF, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, have produced a shoreline primer, but we still feel, as a conservation authority, that a shoreline management plan across the entire lake is needed. And what that would do is it would just make it easier for everybody when they're coming in to get their approvals if they want to do a structure to control erosion or access to the water. It would just make it easier for them to get their approvals because we can't undertake it this year. Natural heritage protection, there are multiple layers of protection afforded through the provincial, federal, and municipal legislation. We also have prescribed instruments. Our watershed is one of the most regulated watersheds in the watershed, or in the province with respect to legislation. The LSPP did identify natural heritage areas, which was really important. Those areas are protected. We have our Ontario Regulation 17906, which protects wetlands, unevaluated wetlands, and floodplains. There is no development in those areas. So a lot of the natural heritage is protected. We also have municipal official plans which designate where growth can occur. You have the white belt, the places to grow, the Oak Ridges Moraine, and our sub-watershed plans, which have been incorporated into your official plans. And those direct growth away from those sensitive areas. So that's the good news there. There was damage done, and we recognize that. Over the last 16 years, we've done 821 restoration projects for natural heritage alone. We've even acquired lands so we can undertake works to restore. And right now, we might differ on the numbers. 45% natural cover does exist. It's more than just forest. There's 35% forest cover. We also have wetlands, and we also have prairie grasslands, which our important natural cover. Our target for the watershed is 66. And you're going to hear a lot more about this as we move on. We published an ecological offset policy, much like the phosphorus policy. So in areas where growth is allowed to occur and there is a feature that we cannot protect, the industry has agreed to offset for the loss of that feature. That money then goes back into these projects to restore or actually create natural heritage features within the watershed. 2018, we completed the restoration strategy. It is our roadmap for how we're going to get to that 66. And it includes the locations and types of what we need to do across the watershed. And it is linked to our land acquisition strategy. And we have 18 projects planned in 2020. And we just are meeting on the 31st. There's a new meeting of what we're calling the Natural Heritage Restoration Steering Committee. It's made up of representation from Simcoe County, Region of Durham, Region of York, the Natural Conservancy of Canada, and ourselves and our foundation. And we're going to be looking to see how we operationalize and put into practice what we've recommended within that report. So that's really exciting. Also aquatic health, the rivers and streams that drain into the lake, not only for phosphorus, but for aquatic health. And we've done more than 186 agricultural projects. Actually, it's almost like 2,186. In the early 80s, we were doing more agricultural projects with the farm community than any other project. So our farm community has done a great job. But just recently, 186 agricultural projects, and we've done 152 habitat restoration works, and these are just examples. Taking out restrictions to flow and barriers to fish, making sure that the creeks, the erosion is fixed, doing tree plantings, again, for shade, and making sure that water recharge is occurring within these cold water systems. So we've been doing this online removal, improving the infiltration across the watershed. We just did a very large project in Barrie. Almost half a kilometer of stream was restored. And it's actually highlighted in your the annual report, which I put on your desk. So these things are happening. So again, and they're being done in partnership with our member municipalities. Oftentimes they're being done in partnership with other stakeholders, the province, and the build industry. So everybody is participating in the cleanup efforts right now. One thing that we are doing a bit more of now is invasive species monitoring. And there's a lot of change in the data for Lake Simcoe, and I would suggest that I come and have our limnologists come and present on the lake. There's a lot of new data that has come out. It's a bit disturbing. Loads are up. Climate change is having a big effect on that, but the lake is actually doing better. And there's a complicated reason for that. My limnologist, Dr. Brian Ginn, says, lake management isn't rocket science, it's much, much more complicated. So I'll let him come and try to explain some of the changes in lake process. So. Climate change, I just wanted to mention, we just published the adaptation strategy. It was approved at our board at the last meeting. Thank you, Councillor Waters, that was great. And we're working on pulling out the mitigation strategy. It'll probably be done by we're thinking May at the latest. We're already working to operationalize this. You're going to be receiving an invitation to a meeting on May 1st, and it's going out to all our municipal partners. And we're working with Intact Insurance on a flood protection program due to climate change, as well as we're going to be talking a bit more about the climate change policies in the afternoon. So it'll be a fun-filled day of climate change if you can attend. And as was mentioned, salt is the new phosphorus. It is a problem. And I'm happy to say that we are going to be meeting with Minister Urick on the 22nd. We banded together with industry folk, other conservation authorities, the province and the federal government. And we created something called the Freshwater Roundtable. And we produced a discussion paper which talks about the best ways to reduce salt within the province. And the best way is really to have those best management practices identified and have them in some type of a policy document, and then have legislation to indemnify businesses and municipalities and whoever if they're following those practices. Right now in the industrial, commercial, and institutional sector, we're seeing way more salt being applied than is necessary across the watershed. Some areas we are seeing toxic conditions within stormwater ponds because they're just putting on so much salt because they're worried about people trip, slips, and falls and being sued. The industry can't even get insurance anymore. So we're hopeful that by working with these different groups and going in and seeing the minister, we'll be able to get the best management practices approved, and then we'll be going to see Minister and Attorney General Honorable Doug Downey to see whether he can pass the legislation to do the indemnification. So stay tuned on that too. So moving forward, there's been a lot of work done, and I would say that the lake is in better shape than it was when I first started at the Conservation Authority. With that said, there's new challenges and new stressors, and we have to be vigilant, and by no means is the job done. We need to continue to work with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks and other partners to do the work. We are in the process of establishing new targets for restoration. And certainly one of the things we'll be working on with the province is the lake target, because it is an ecological target that was made, established in the late 80s, early 90s. And it might not be as realistic as we think. So that's very important. Moving forward, we have targets that are smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And we certainly do applaud the efforts of the group in pushing this forward. We have to reduce phosphorus and we have to improve the lake no matter what we do. So we are developing a dashboard to demonstrate our progress, and that'll be something on the website, which we hope it'll be easy to understand, and it won't have all the science embedded in some of the reports. It'll just be, here's how we're doing. We're already in the process of doing the engagement strategy, and that'll be a community-wide engagement strategy across the watershed. And we're going to be able to accelerate restoration this year, and that's because of the revenue being generated from those offset programs. And to that, I thank the build industry, because they are becoming one of our bigger partners with respect to working with us, not only to build it right the first time, but also to provide the funds so that we can go back and do a lot of the work that we have to do. Because that has been the biggest barrier to implementation is obviously the dollars to do the work. And lastly, we're working on a 10-year capital plan that we want to align with our municipal partners. There's a lot of projects that you're doing in the works area that if we could piggyback onto them, we can find real good return on investment with respect to installing either low-impact development or looking at some other type of phosphorus control. So we're starting that exercise, and again, we'll be working with your staff to look at how we can best align some of our programs with your programs to get the maximum return on our investment and make sure that the watershed stays healthy. So with that, I'd be more than happy to take any questions on phosphorus monitoring or anything else that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Walters. Questions or comments for Mr. Walters? Deputy Mayor Davidson.
I think this is the most I've talked all year. Seems to be that night. First of all, there was a resort built on Lake Simcoe several years ago. When I was involved with that organization, I understood that for every tree removed, there were certain stipulations put in place, certain size, certain type. I think the number was 50,000 trees. Originally, were supposed to be planted in Innisfil. I remember being in council at the time when I actually was told where those trees were going to go. That deal didn't work out, and a deal was worked out, I'm going to say it, without council's notice, that those trees would be planted in Simcoe County or in South Simcoe County. How far are we ahead in that process of planting those 50,000 trees, which were to go into Innisfil but are going into South Simcoe?
Through your worship, the revenue that was provided for that has been spent, so the trees have been planted. If you look at our natural heritage restoration strategy, and it is online, so you'll be able to click and you can see the map, there are areas in Innisfil that we have identified. And they are areas, unfortunately, most of them are private lands. So that's going to require either conservation easements or downright acquisition. So it is going to be very challenging. We have done a lot of private tree planting. In Innisfil, we do have a good uptake of our planting program. So I can come back if you like or provide you just some of the numbers of what has been planted where. I didn't go into that much detail today, but we have the numbers. We essentially track every project that we do spatially as well as what was done. And as long as we have the landowner's approval to release that information, we put it on that map and we do it. And we usually do get the approval. I don't think we've been denied yet.
Follow up to that. As you know, I've been involved with South Simcoe Streams Network for about 12 years. They've planted hundreds of thousands of trees in Innisfil, and more, I would say Innisfil and Bradford area. How well do you work along with them in counting the amount of trees? And there's a big initiative coming up with the town about greening and all this tree stuff. Have you worked with them to coordinate the tree planting regime that the town's talking about in the future?
Through your worship. The tree planting that we've done in partnership with them, we know very well. The problem is if they do work outside of working with us, then we might not have that information, and in fact, nobody does. And this has been a problem of the Lake Simcoe plan for years, is just coordinating the gathering of all the information of who is doing what within the watershed. Now, with the advent of the Science Committee and the Coordinating Committee that was created, that got a little better. But there was still information that couldn't be shared because of freedom of information or privacy. So a large part of it has to do with landowner willingness to share the information. The other part is if we are spending tax dollars to do this work, that information should be public. So we have an open data portal right now for all of our science information with respect to the water quality, the water quantity, all of the benthic invertebrate, the fisheries. We're hoping to do the same thing for our projects, and that's part of this idea of the dashboard. So you can see the number of trees being planted within the watershed. It'd be like hopefully it'd be like an odometer that's spinning a lot, because tree planting is one of our best adaptive management techniques to fix climate change. So there'll be a lot of emphasis in your finding, and what we're seeing is everything is connected. So our climate change strategy links into our tree planting and natural heritage program, links into our land acquisition program, and all of these things are interconnected.
Thank you. I think the last partnership was the Lovers Creek Restoration Watershed. Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Mike, for your presentation. And I guess I'll ask my question again on phosphorus, and it's
The boss, sorry.
It's definitely a concern for everyone. Everyone has a part to play in reducing phosphorus. And there's been a lot of, I guess to say, hype about this 44 tons. And so when I read in the report that we've way overshot that, and yet the lake hasn't responded how we suspected it would, it just, the complexities of measuring things, it led me to the question, like how do we measure phosphorus and how it enters the lake?
Okay. So through your worship, we have a network of monitoring programs for all the tributaries that actually measure concentration and they measure stream flow. And from that, we calculate something called phosphorus load to the lake. So load is a function of concentration times the volume equals your load. So we're actually out there measuring it. We actually take samples during rain events, we take samples during dry weather, we take samples during normal events. We also have a host of computer models that can tell us where phosphorus is coming from or predict where phosphorus is coming from within a watershed. And that is calibrated based on, again, these sampling sites. So we use those tools to actually predict what the actual load is going to the lake. And from that, we look at trying to make informed decisions for management. So phosphorus loads have increased dramatically, and the biggest driver right now for us is climate change. Concentrations have actually, we've seen reductions in concentrations in many of our rivers, and that's because of the work we've been doing. The Holland River, East Holland River, is one of the most polluted rivers in the watershed. It has gone down at about 8% in phosphorus reduction, which we take as a victory, because we've done a lot of work on stormwater there in the towns of Newmarket and Aurora. Unfortunately, climate change is causing more and more runoff events, which washes the phosphorus into the lake, and that is the biggest threat, one of the biggest threats that we have. Despite the fact that phosphorus loads are up above what they were 5 years ago, the lake oxygen level is better. And this was a complex relationship between, usually the more there is phosphorus, the less oxygen is in the water, because phosphorus drives the growth of aquatic plants and algae. When they die, they sink to the bottom, they decompose, and they use the oxygen that's in the water in that decomposition. And that was why the fishery crashed. There was no oxygen in the bottom water. The fish would go down there in the fall to spawn, and they couldn't because they couldn't get down there because there was no oxygen. So it's a very complex, and this is where rocket science does come in. It's one of those relationships that still exists. The relationship itself is still solid. What is happening is there's other changes in the lake. There's other things which are actually using the phosphorus in Lake Simcoe, and those are invasive species. We had zebra mussels come in the 90s. They've since been replaced by quagga mussels. Quagga mussels can filter the lake in 3 days. They are filter feeders, and they're taking a lot of the phosphorus out of the lake, but what they're doing is they're putting it back into the sediment. And it's available there for plant uptake. So that's not a good thing. But so we still have to reduce phosphorus coming in. We have something called starry stonewort, which is an algae that looks like an aquatic plant. And it's using a lot of the phosphorus. So even though we have more phosphorus going in, we've got these other factors that are reducing the concentrations in the lake. And as a result, the oxygen level is getting better. So we don't by any means want people to think that the problem has been solved, because it hasn't. Because should something happen to these invasive species, and we don't want starry stonewort, we want to get rid of it, and we don't address the phosphorus issue, the lake will not be restored to health. It'll be the exact opposite. So the management decisions that we're going to be making in the future still focus on phosphorus reduction. They focus on reducing salt. They focus on restoring the natural heritage features. And with that, we have to come up with a management plan for the lake now that looks at these invasive species and how to best manage them. And that's going to be the really hard part.
Any other questions? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Mike, for that presentation. It's always nice to see some of that information presented to council that we see on a regular basis that are at the board meetings. Just a point that I would like to make is I worked for the Toronto Region Conservation Authority for 30 years, and I know quite well what conservation authorities do. And over those 30 years, I shook my head many times and wondering what the heck was going on. And I'm proud to say that I have yet to shake my head while I've sat on a conservation authority board. I think you guys are doing a great job. I think you're being innovative. I think you're thinking of what your clients want, and we're one of the clients. Builders are one of the clients. Farmers are the clients. I think you listen to them, and I think you try to work with them and streamline processes. So my question comes down to, for ourselves, could you just maybe general overview in terms of some of the streamlining things that you've done with the partnerships with Build and farmers to help move permit processes faster? Thank you.
Okay. I'll be very brief, Madam Mayor. Thank you. Through your worship. Right now, there is a big push. We have been one of our main goals in our strategic plan is to provide excellence in service. So that means client service and to always improve on process if we can. We've always been meeting with the build industry. We've been doing it for about 10 years now to find out what their requirements are. Up till about a year ago, we did have an agricultural group, and they actually did approve all the projects, but we found out we were doing so many projects in the urban area that they were not seeing the agricultural projects. So that group has disbanded, and we're now talking about forming a committee, which is the agricultural reps across the watershed. But we do go out and we talk to them, and we've done focus groups in the past to look at what is it that you want us to change? What are we doing well? What aren't we doing well? What can we improve upon? And it just so happens I've just completed an operational review at the authority this year. I'll be presenting it to the board before it goes public, and we'll be coming out to do our next strategic plan this year. So we'll be coming to council, and we'll be coming to your staff and asking those very same questions again. But just quickly, ECAs, for example, we'll use that. You guys have the ability to do the environmental compliance approvals in-house. That was an initiative, actually, we started with Innovation Branch of the Ministry of Environment at the time. The first pilot was in Barrie, and it worked. We actually do provide that service for other municipalities that don't have capacity within the watershed. And that's reduced the wait time for the industry anywhere from 6 to 9 months to get their approvals. We're looking at online permitting right now, and that would be something that would help because people wouldn't have to come into the office. They could submit their applications online, and we could just issue the permits. But we have a 30-day window, and every permit that comes in gets a start time and an end time. And I'm happy to say that we are 99.9% within the 30 days for all of our permits. So sometimes they're 2 weeks, sometimes they're longer if we don't have all the data. So we are trying to get better, and certainly we'll be asking for some advice. from both our member municipalities and the industry again on how we can improve and streamline services.
Thank you, Mike. Your staff was really nice to send me the list of all the permits that have been issued in Innisfil for the past year. And I went through them all and tried to calculate on start dates and finishing dates. And you came in at about 10 days per permit.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walters. I just want to thank you for coming here today. The question I would have to you is if 44 is no longer the number, what is the number? We want to set targets that are achievable, and maybe I would ask someone to put forward a motion that the presentation be received and that staff work with Mr. Walters to come up with an achievable target for a resolution to be put forward, so that we aren't setting our sights so high that there is no way that they can be met, and we've set ourselves up for failure, or we've set you up for failure, which we certainly don't want to do. We do work well together. I think we always have. Our salt programs, we use best management practice for our road salt. I don't think the road salt is the issue here. I think it is the big plazas, and also through the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, we've been working with the Attorney General with the indemnification that you spoke about earlier, because certainly municipalities would see a great deal of benefit in that. So if with your help, we'll work together and do great things.
And through your worship, that's the big recommendation back to the province, is that we need to open up and take a look at the new science and see exactly what we should be working for. But we have to remain vigilant. I think we have to reduce as much phosphorus going to lake as humanly possible on a cost-effective basis. So.
Thank you. So is there a recommendation on the floor? Nobody took my hint. Councillor Nicol?
Just to amend the recommendation to also refer this back to staff to work with the Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority on realistic phosphorus goals for the lake. And seconded by Councillor Van Berkel.
Any questions or comments on that? I guess my one change would be to aggressive but realistic phosphorus goals for Lake Simcoe. Is that a friendly amendment? Okay. Okay. Any other questions or comments from anyone? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Appreciate it. And now I'd like to welcome Keith Taylor from One Investment and Colin McDonald, Investment Services, Municipal Finance Officers Association. I want to thank you for being so patient. And I know now you know more about Lake Simcoe than you ever thought you would know in your life. But there you go.
Thank you for the opportunity. Colin McDonald is not here tonight. My colleague, Eleanor Schneider, is joining me.
Oh, thank you, Alan. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you, Mayor Dolan. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Davidson, council and staff for allowing us to be here today and present One Investment. We're here today to talk about Prudent Investor, to talk about your IPS and your investment plan that has been developed by Keith Taylor. Keith Taylor is with One Investment and I'm with LAS. So I'll walk you through part of the presentation and then I'll pass it on to Keith. Next. Hopefully I can work this. So just to give you some background in terms of One Investment and who we are, we're a nonprofit organization that was established back in 1993. We've been operating as a non-for-profit through LAS and CHUMS. We were previously a program, so we are now Local Authority Services is the business arm of AMO, and CHUMS is the subsidiary of the Municipal Finance Officers Association of Ontario. So we have been jointly operating a municipally compliant program for 25 years, offering portfolio options such as bonds, corporate bonds, equity portfolios to municipalities across Ontario. Just to give you some highlights here in terms of who we represent, we have 173 municipalities and boards that invest with One Investment currently through our legal list portfolios. That represents approximately 39% of all municipalities across Ontario. We're growing every day. We offer turnkey investment solutions. That's one of our key selling features or key items of who we are and how we describe ourselves. We understand the industry based on our history of AMO as an advocacy group and also as MFOA representing the Finance Officers Association. So we understand the sector quite well and we're proud to say that. Our structure is that we have also a governance structure that's overseen by we actually have an investment advisory committee made up of professionals who help us and guide us through investments and our offerings, as well as represented by our peers. So municipalities sit on a peer advisory committee that provide us insights in terms of what's happening on the municipal side of things. This slide basically gives you an overview in terms of our investments by portfolio. We have a high interest savings account, which is very attractive to municipalities. As you can see, we're comparing our balances year over year. Most of our products are increasing, and I think at the end of 2019, as it says up there, we surpassed $2 billion. We're at $2.2 billion. Legal list versus prudent investing. As the picture describes, just to give you a snapshot of kind of the differences between the two. Legal list is very restrictive. You're guided by the Municipal Act and the restrictions within the Municipal Act. Prudent investor has been terminology and has been in place for many, many years. There's the OMERS pension plan is guided by the prudent investor standard. They've been operating under this regime for years and years. The key thing is diverse portfolio offerings, greater choice and flexibility, and ability to be managed by professionals. Portfolio level thinking. Again, want to talk about the distinctions between legal list and prudent investor, and just to highlight some key points in terms of legal list. On the legal list side, the municipality owns your investment policy statement, and you also own all the decisions. Your treasurer is responsible for making all those decisions and working with council in terms of where to invest. We don't get involved in that. On the prudent investor side of things, the control is, or the investments are managed by a group of investment professionals. All those decisions on what to invest in are defined by your risk, which is identified in your investment policy statement. So very key. Council makes those decisions, they approve that, and then prudent investor, the plan is initiated and it's guided by all the decisions within the investments are managed by professionals to make sure that we stay in line with what you want. The other point that prudent investor really highlights is diversification. Diversification is very important, and Keith will talk about that in terms of limiting risk.
Yeah, maybe I'll step in here, and this is probably the single slide that describes what we're doing with prudent investor. There's a lot going on here, so I'll take a few moments. This is a risk and return graph. On the vertical axis, it explains the returns going up is better. And on the horizontal axis, it's a measure of risk, bad outcomes, and going off to the left is much worse. So in this particular graph, less risk and more return is moving up and to the left. So we have three opportunity sets here. The blue line is identified as the legal list. If you invested only in those legal list investments, This defines the range of opportunity sets, and you could not, you could not get opportunities up and to the left from there within the constraints of the legal list. And the line represents different investment allocations that might be within the legal list. Once you take the restrictions from the legal list off, allowing investors to, allowing the municipality to invest in foreign securities, a broader range of securities, different credit qualities, different types of asset classes, the opportunity set is larger, allowing for diversification benefits that gives you an opportunity set with basically more risk, more return for each unit of risk. In our case, we have selected managers and designed a program specifically for the municipalities. We have active managers, and we have tailored the offering for the audience. And we know that the other municipalities are a bit risk averse. So we have tailored the offering with attributes that actually improve on the generic prudent investor offering. And as you see, in terms of the worst case outcomes, the opportunities that we're trying to map out doesn't have the nasty negative return outcomes that are in the red line. And net, you're getting a little bit more. Or just taking a look at, in this scenario analysis, where if you have a 5% down, possible worst case downside, if that is the worst case over the investment horizon, you can just see that there's a pickup in return for each of these regimes. And moving up to the prudent investor regime, for the same amount of risk, you're getting a return of about 4.5%, whereas the legal list, you're potentially more at 3.5%. So yeah, it's a simple story. You get more bang for your buck. It's in very simple terms. A little bit complicated, but it tells the whole story from moving to prudent investor. More choice and more diversification is in the benefit of the investor. And diversification is effectively one of the few free lunches around. There we go. Now, the other thing that's pertinent for the prudent investor regime, the monies that are invested by the municipality are long-term monies, money not required immediately. And that fits into the investment profile. The one thing that should be mentioned, the longer you have to invest, the more you can benefit from the long-term growth that's available in investments, and you can go through the dips in the market. Much like we've seen in the last couple of weeks, there's a lot of volatility. If you invest for the long term and ignore the dips, you should be able to get better returns. Now, what this chart does is it takes a look at the investment returns on different holding periods. And if you have a one-year holding period, and this is, I won't go into too much detail, I don't want to bury you in numbers. If your investment period is only 1 year, and that's off to the left, and this particular study was done since 1956, looking at each 12-month period from 1956. The worst possible return, if you invest at the worst time over that period of time, the 12-month return, the worst one, if you cherry-picked it, it would be negative 39%. And obviously, that was a crisis situation. Likewise, if you cherry-picked the very best return over the one-year period, rolling 12-month period since 1956, it was about 86%, whereas on average, it's in the range of 10%. But if you can invest for the long term, if you remember in 1998 when the market went way down, it took about 12 to 18 months before it recouped most of its losses. If you have the time to be in the market and benefit from the growth, the dips you don't have to really worry too much about. You end up growing out of it. And in this case, we're just showing for equity investments, if you take a look at the 7 rolling year period, if you have a long investment horizon, even if you invest at the absolute worst time and the market tanks after you invest, but if you can hold on to it for 7 years, based on the statistics we have up here, in that case, the lowest annual return was positive 1.94%. So time is your friend. If you have the benefit of growth and you have the time and you stay invested, you don't really have to worry about the dips in the market, which I think in terms of what's happening in the financial markets in the last couple of weeks, I think that's a very pertinent point. If you could just, this slide didn't come through quite the way we had. Oh, there we go. See, that's what we wanted to do. Sorry, something was missing. Excuse me. This is back to the free ride I was talking about. I'm not suggesting that you invest only in equities for the long term. The whole point is to get diversification, which means you have a bit of both equities and fixed income. Having basically the old argument, having your eggs in different baskets is the whole point. And in this case, these are, OMERS obviously is a relevant pension fund for staff, I think would resonate somewhat. And CPP Investment Board, I think that's everyone in the room benefits from this. They do invest for the long term. Their investment horizon is based on the average age that folks are retiring in Canada. And investing for the long term for them means that they have a very hefty allocation into equities, because the equities are what provides growth for the investment portfolio. It allows for the asset values to rise over time, so the assets are there to pay out all of our pensions. So this is really what we're kind of suggesting for Innisfil. Maybe not quite as aggressive as this in terms of the amount of equity allocation, but this is quite normal. For long-term investing, meaningful allocations to equities is helping solve the long-term goals.
Just to give you an overview of the solutions that we've created for our prudent investor offering. And I just want to highlight one thing that One Investment really wants to impress on all of our municipalities that are moving through prudent investor with us is that we approach it with a crawl, walk, run strategy. So we are not here to run through the gates. We are here to crawl, understanding our participants that are moving through this process with us. We've created these solutions that we believe make sense. The three solutions are the contingency, stable return, target date. So I'm just going to give you a few highlights on what each outcome means. So what we're looking at now is outcome investing. We've created these solutions. With these solutions, there'll be different allocations under each solution. So asset allocations, meaning the setup between bonds, equities, cash within each solution, and that is something that Keith will speak to. But we've designed them to say that we have a contingency outcome, things for winter maintenance or unexpected events where you need to draw funds quickly. Or you don't know when those big dips will happen. We've created a solution for that. The asset allocation that will be set up will be dependent on how your plan is defined as well as your IPS. So that's one of the solutions. Our stable return outcome is designed for things such as legacy funds. So if you've sold your hydro utility, many of municipalities have, and you want to draw a certain amount of funds, you set this up as a stable return because we have an expected income from that. That's just giving you one example in terms of how the stable return outcome will be set up. But again, there'll be an allocation behind it that is suited to that outcome. And then the third one is target date. I don't think in terms of your plan, anything has been set up in terms of target date for Innisfil at this point in time, but it's usually linked to specific projects. I'll give you an example through your capital plan. If you need to build a rec center and you're going to do it in about 15 years, you can set this up as a target date outcome. And again, the allocation behind it will be set up in such a way that you can achieve those goals.
Yeah, I think that these solutions are a great way of approaching it for the municipality, primarily from a messaging point of view. So I don't have to ask your treasurer, how much equity you think is right, because they probably wouldn't give me a very clear answer, but they can tell me when that rec center is going to be built, or what type of contingencies are out there, or how much they're allocating to it. So it's a way of getting, of having more clear communication of the objectives for the municipality and translating that through the Joint Investment Board and myself to an investment allocation. So it's a messaging thing. Now, specifically, I guess it's relevant to go through some brief overview of what we've put together in terms of Innisfil's investment plan. Specifically, I sat down with staff to run through this, and we looked at the investment policy statement. The one thing that was noted that the definition of money required immediately is for 24 months or less. That lines up with, for budgeting purposes, very conveniently. So the way it works is money that's required immediately stays with the treasurer to be invested. It will remain invested within the legal list of available securities. Anything beyond that, the money not required immediately, beyond 24 months, will be managed by the Joint Investment Board within the range of products we have available for that, which includes more global mandates and a wider range of investment products. There's, in the package, there's an investment policy statement, a municipal client questionnaire. The client questionnaire, for your information, is more like a know your client type questionnaire that gives the details of it enumerates the circumstances of the municipality so we can have specific direction and specific knowledge of the details. And lastly, there's, and those two documents, IPS, the investment policy statement, and the client questionnaire, are prepared by staff as a way to communicate the needs of the community. The investment plan is something that's written by myself and the Joint Investment Board, which is an interpretation of those two documents and turning them into action. Just to note that the investments that will be deployed within for the community, everything is fully liquid. And if there's a need for the money to go back to the community or more money to come in, there's full flexibility. Everything we have, the underlying investments, equities and bonds and this sort, yeah, we can change things on a dime. And as circumstances change in the community, so too can the details. So basically the point is, we're helping you with the work, but it's your money, and we will accommodate whatever the needs or circumstances are. Within the plan, it's been defined that money not required immediately will be $15 million in terms of liquid assets. These monies have a long investment time horizon. It's helpful that the money has a longer investment time horizon because that gives us the ability to invest it long term. And as I showed earlier in the presentation, it can be invested with a long time frame, so the volatility in the market is dampened by the long-term investment horizon. The risk profile is relatively moderate. I don't, in the plan, we're talking somewhere in the range, broadly speaking, to 20% equity, give or take. As I showed in the slides earlier, for the pension funds, it's close to the range of 50%. So this is not, your treasurer will be able to sleep at night, is the bottom line there. It is actually very conservative, but has some potential for growth. And there's not a lot of big ticket items on the agenda in the coming years. So the monies have been split evenly between our stable return outcome and contingency outcome, especially with the DC monies. There's a great deal of uncertainty as to when the monies will be available, and that seems to map out quite conveniently to the contingency outcome, which should provide some ample growth for the future. And the liquidity of in terms of what investments are available presently, there's no securities that need to be wound down over time to finance this $15 million. So the transition into the prudent investor on that side should be very straightforward.
So to the numbers. As I say, the allocation that I was suggesting was a 50-50 split between these two outcomes. The contingency outcome is, these are forward-looking numbers. They're long-term, forward-looking numbers. Obviously, what can happen in the market from day to day can be much larger than we're seeing on the screen, especially in recent days. But the long-term outlook for the contingency solution is returns of about 4.2%. The underlying data that we used to put these together was based on consultant research by Aon. And that, in terms of returns for the amount invested, is roughly about $314,000 in terms of annual returns. And the stable return is more like 3.8%, or about $284,000. So, and I apologize for the last slide, or the last chart at the bottom. The markets have been moving very quickly in the last week, and I'm sure you might have noticed that the Bank of Canada changed their interest rates, and our HISA rate has moved with it. So, up to about a week ago, the coupon on the HISA product, or not the coupon, the interest rate was 2.415. It's come down 50 basis points from that, not in our control. So the actual differential in terms of the pickup in return versus the alternative has actually increased by about, we'll say 50 basis points, but it's a moving target at the moment. So moving to a prudent investor in terms of recurring annual income, or incremental, is in the tune of about $237,000. I will just close it off for there, and if there's questions, I think that's probably a more appropriate format to explore this more.
Thank you very much for that, and I'm sorry, Ms. Schneider, I should have realized that you weren't Mr. McDonald.
That's fine. Thank you. Questions
and comments. First, I'll ask if Ms. Webb or Mr. Melanician, sorry, he's so new, I'm still getting used to his name. If you had any comments you'd like to add to the presentation.
Just quickly, coming on board new to this was absolutely exciting. And when you say exciting from an Ontario Regulation 438/97 from an accountant and a financial professional's perspective, it is exciting because now we have opportunity to get more money, throw it back into the community, invest more money at a minimal risk. And it was just one of those no-brainer situations. It was like, we got to move forward quickly. So it's been one of my priorities since I came on board. And thanks to Keith and Eleanor for helping Audrey and I pull this together.
Thank you. Ms. Webb, did you have any comments? No? Questions or comments from members of council? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much for the presentation. Now, I'm going to state up front that I'm not a wise investor, so I'll just put that out there. But just a couple of questions, and it might be best for you to answer or our new CFO to answer the questions. So the two questions I have is that the first one is when you do this, there's always an administration cost. So I don't know, under the legal list, is there an administration cost for that? And what is the administration cost for this? And has that been taken out of the new revenues that we'll expect?
Broadly speaking, the fees that are involved in the process, in the prudent investor or legal list, they're baked right into the funds themselves. So the costs are deducted from the fund itself. So if for one of our products, if it's like 50 basis points or 0.5%, it's deducted from the returns. And broadly speaking, without going into specifics, the actual percentage costs are going to be relatively similar between legal list and prudent investor.
Thank you. Follow-up. The other question I have is I was looking at the chart in our attachment, and it's under the anticipated founding municipalities of job, GIB, I think it says. And I'm just kind of curious, how is it that the District of Muskoka has $128 million and we have 15? Is that just because they're not spending as fast as we are?
Mr. Malenishin?
Through your worship to Councillor Waters. No, this is our first attempt at it. We took a very conservative approach as far as the amount of money we were going to put forward as an MNRI, the money not required immediately. We could have increased that limit, but we wanted to, as Eleanor said, take crawl, step, run, her approach, and move slowly into it. And just so that we could go a little bit higher, but we thought it'd be a little bit more conservative in our approach. Your first question about the management expense ratio, expenses to move into the prudent investor fund. A key thing to note here is that we're moving quickly on this as we are a founding member of this joint investment board. And thanks to the support of council and especially Mayor Dolan, we've been pushing forward very quickly. We have a deadline of the end of March to become a founding member, which allows us to have reduced expenses for the next 10 years. So that's part of one of the reasons we're trying to move quickly as soon as we can.
Thank you. So I'm going to, for all you people who don't speak accountant, I'm going to put my layman's terms on this and just tell you how exciting this project was for us. For many years, municipalities had advocated for the same rights and privileges that the City of Toronto had. All municipalities, all 443 of us in Ontario, are governed by the Municipal Act, and the City of Toronto is governed by the City of Toronto Act. The City of Toronto has had the ability to do this for some time. None of the rest of us did. So that was back when I was president with the former Minister of Municipal Affairs and advocating for the same rights as the City of Toronto. Now, none of us, well, maybe some, the York Region or someone could afford to set up their own investment board, but certainly we would never have the ability to do something like that. So to be able to get in on the ground floor as a founding member with places like Aurora that are putting in substantially more than we are, you know, I think it's great for us to be in this position and also to get the sound, prudent advice from these very capable investors that will be heading up this board. When the City of Toronto put their board together, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Eleanor, but I'm pretty sure it was about $40,000 in just to set the board up. So we're very fortunate to be in this position, and I'm hoping, I'm looking forward to having the opportunity, rather than it. This is like if you had a bunch of money saved up and all you could do is put it in your checking account. You know, now we're getting to put it in a tax-free savings account. So we're going to do more with the residents' money, and the mostly development charge money that we're sitting waiting to invest will actually be helping. And the more that we can do to increase that money, the less that we have to ask our residents for. So this has been a long time coming, and I'm just so excited that it's here. Anyone else? Councillor Fowler.
Just a quick question regarding the diversification. When it comes to securities and whatnot, how broad is the range of options that we have? And what control do we have over them? So hypothetically, council decides one day that, you know, we want to invest in green technology because, you know, it relates to the orbit or the GO station or whatever the case may be. Can we direct you to invest it in a specific manner, or is it more of a package that comes to us from there if we move forward in that direction?
Mr. Taylor?
Sure, yes, thank you. Okay, well, the money is handed over to the Joint Investment Board to direct, so we will take whatever advice or input from the participating members in the JIB, but the investment choices are left with them and not with the municipality. That said, we're starting off at ground level. We have a number of investment choices that will give the meat and potatoes, so to speak. As we move forward over time and the assets grow, as potentially more municipalities join in and the pool of assets grow, there's two things that we were looking to benefit for. This industry is, you know, fixed costs is a major thing. If we have more assets used off that fixed base, the costs for everyone drop. And that's one thing we're looking forward to. And the opportunity sets should expand. So if we have more money under prudent investor with the JIB, we can start adding more unique products. We may go into some sort of alternate investments, or there's a potential that we could tailor some specific ESG or climate-related green products as appropriate. The whole point is that this is formed by the municipalities for the municipalities, and it should be responsive to their needs and desires. And it may be encouraging that you're not the first one that's asked that about green-type investments. There's a number of municipalities in Ontario that have raised that issue, and it's something that is on our agenda to figure out how we best address that. The other thing, just to enumerate something that you said earlier about the opportunity set, the Canadian equity and bond markets represent roughly 3% of the global equity and bond markets. And the legal list allows you access to only a subset of that 3% of the Canadian investment universe. So, I mean, the world is your oyster. This is opening up a huge amount of diversification potential. There's a lot more opportunities that we will have moving under prudent than are currently available under legal lists. So I fully agree. This is one of the most exciting things in the finance sector at the moment. It's opening up a new opportunity set, and I'm actually very happy to be involved in it, and I'm very glad that Innisfil is also.
Councillor Asadi.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I had flooded staff with multiple questions after reading this report, so I have to thank staff for your patience and the time that you took to answer every one of the questions to help me to clarify and understand the report better. I like the fact that we have this opportunity, as our mayor says, to be a part of the founding members, because without that, we'd have no opportunity to ever be involved in this. So it is a step moving forward. One of the questions I'd ask staff is whether this is also going to go to, we have an annual report that will be coming back to council, and whether this will be going to our audit committee. And for me, that's more assurances and everything, and the answer to that was all yes. So. Thank you.
Mr. Malinishin?
Yeah, just in response, I hope, Councillor Setti, that the responses did make sense. We did respond. Yes, and we will be reviewing this, the investment policy, investment plan on an annual basis with Council, as well as sending it off to the audit committee for further review. So, and just one other point to Councillor Fowler's question. One of the mandates under one JIB, or one joint investment, is green, environmental, and socially responsible funds that they're entering into. So that was one of the key things we were looking for, and one of the decision factors in moving forward on moving towards a prudent investor regime, because that is one of their mandates.
Thank you. One last comment, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank, and even though he's not here, Lockie Davis. Lockie I dragged him kicking and screaming into this a couple of years ago, and I know that he put a lot of time and effort, blood, sweat, and tears into the project, and unfortunately he's retired from here, but I know that Judy Dizelle told me that she'll be knocking at his door and asking for his expertise in the future. So I thank you very much for being here tonight. So the recommendation is that the delegation regarding investment policy statement under prudent investor regime be received, and that's moved by Deputy Mayor Davidson and seconded by Councillor Fowler. All those in favor? That is carried. And then item 6.4 is the report that we're just referring to, DSR 03820. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that report? Councillor Asadi, Deputy Mayor Davidson. Mr. Brainerd.
Thank you, Worship, members of council. I just wanted to also extend our appreciation to the legal team as you gathered from your read of the policies, as well as the significant legal work that's gone into this foundation. I just wanted to thank Lee and his team. We've I wouldn't say pushed, but we have had some really interesting negotiations as this JIB has been formed, and it's been excellent to have our legal team engaged. So thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Parkin, and pass that on to the team. All in favor of the recommendation? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll move on to item number 7. Is there any updates from County Council, conservation authorities? I think we've done a lot of talk about conservation authorities, and there's more to come. So, County Council, Deputy Mayor, anything to report?
Not at this time, but I did hear Lockie Davis's name mentioned at County Council, so I know what he's doing next.
I'd just like to say that we had long and fulsome discover about governance, everybody's favorite conversation, and it's been sent back to the governance committee, so no decisions are made as yet, but stay tuned. And I also wanted to let you know that the staff gave the direction to, council gave direction to staff to approach the City of Barrie, Innisfil and ESSA to talk about feasibility for the Barrie-Collingwood Railway and how that could better be utilized. So we'll be having some conversations about that. And finally, a sad announcement, which was, well, happy for her, I guess, is the retirement of Deb Krolnick. Deb's the general manager of corporate services, so she does planning, engineering, tourism, and everybody's favorite topic, waste management. So no wonder she's retiring. But so anyway, that was what happened at County Council. So item number 7.2, so I will pass the chair to the Deputy Mayor.
Okay, so I need a first and second. Can I get a first and seconder on this, please? Councillor Isis and Councillor Waters. Got it. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that the recommendation as read, all in favor? Done. Thank you, carried.
Thank you, Council. Next, we'll go through the adoption of the consent list. So we'll start with A1, the special council minutes of February 19th. A2, the special council meeting of February 26th. A3, the regular council meeting, Feb 26th. B1, the Municipal Heritage Committee report. B2, the Innisfil Beach Park Ad Hoc Committee report. B3, the School Zone and Traffic Safety Advisory Committee report. C1, the Advanced Sedimentation Pilot Project. Councillor Ices?
Yeah, I'll defer.
Referred to committee by Councillor Ices. C2, the South Innisfil Creek Drain Update. C3, the Short-Term Rental Accommodations Information Report. Okay, so did anybody want to, should we, if there's going to be 2 comments, we might as well refer it, okay? Is that all right? Referred by Deputy Mayor Davidson. C4, the Mobility Orbit GO Station Project Manager and Procurement.
I'd just like to make some comments on that too.
Okay, we'll refer it to committee. Thank you, Councillor Van Perkel. So D, staff reports for information, there is none. E, other bylaws, there is none. F, correspondence for action, the COPE service dogs. Looking forward to that. F2, the Innisfil Community Events Corporation, the Onion Fest. Councillor Ices.
Refer.
Okay, item G is the correspondence for information. There are 2 items. Anybody want to pull either one of those items? I just want to point out the one, which was the Veteran Affairs Canada, a successful grant application to help restore the Cookstown Cenotaph. And I want to thank the committee and the committee coordinator, Kevin Jacob, for putting that application in and making that happen. I know that that will make the veterans in Cookstown very happy. Deputy Mayor Davidson.
I'd just like to speak on item G2. I think it's a great organization that's doing many things in Innisfil. I know they have some very strong concerns, and I've spoken with our CEO and our mayor, sorry about that, about some of the locations they're looking for putting on these events at Christmas time for storage of donations and stuff. So I think you'll be hearing more from myself and others in the near future. Thank you.
Okay, so then we go to 8.1, the consent list recommendation. So we've got 4 items pulled and to be referred to committee of the whole. So if anybody was here for any of those other items and you're wondering what the outcome was, chances are when we do the confirmation that whatever the staff report is, that's what the recommendation will be. So I need a mover and a seconder for the consent list. Councillor Fowler, Councillor Asadi, all those in favor? That is carried. And now I need a recommendation to resolve into committee of the whole. Councillor Asadi, Councillor Van Berkel, all those in favor? That's carried. And item C1, that was Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Fowler is seconding my referral to committee. And so I just wanted the residents to, we talked a lot about tonight about the environment, and the report is quite technical. It talks, there's a lot of numbers and whatnot, but I wanted to highlight that this is a very innovative project. I had some discussion with staff yesterday at the Bel Air Creek Open House, and it's just a great project that's going to help Innisfil deal with environment. What the gist of it is, the stormwater management ponds will be have a bit of a, I should see if I can find the right spot here. The procedure is to control the erosion that's in the sediment pond. It will flocculate out a lot of the small particles, and the water that comes out of those ponds will be better for the environment. So just another innovation that Innisfil is a part of, and it's also funded by the Canadian municipalities in the form of a grant. So we're winning on both sides, Innisfil, in the cost share, cost help in this project, and also the betterment of the environment. So that was my comments.
Thank you. Anyone else? I just want to thank staff because it's great to get these grants, but it's not always easy to find them, apply for them. So I just want to thank staff also for jumping onto this project. And I know there was partnership in that, but it still is something great that we'll learn from. So thank you for that. So we had a mover and a seconder. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. I'm just remiss. Was there anybody from Greenland here? Oh, okay. So thank you, Greenland, very much for partnering with us on this project. Okay, so the next item was C3, short-term rental, and that was Deputy Mayor Davidson.
It's seconded by Councillor Ices. Okay, I just want to speak on a few items here that I'm concerned about. I know it's going to go back to staff, but I would like page 4 of the 12 pages that you sent to us, and page 5, there's some key notice in there regarding, I'm just going to back it up here, zoning bylaw amendments we can do, interim control bylaw, and administrative approach. So there's different options for us to look at, and following it on the media and what other municipalities, I think it's Ramera, has implemented a $1,000 fee for people to register their, whatever you want to call these places. Alberta, a court, there's a judicial decision brought down by the Alberta courts that these, we don't have them in Innisfil yet, but these condos that have been basically completed, the entire condo is Airbnbs. So now they come under the jurisdiction as hotels, which is something new for attacking Airbnbs, which Metro GTA is dealing with. I think the biggest issue we're having in Innisfil, and this gentleman mentioned it earlier tonight, is party houses. And I think what we have to do is look at our different bylaws that we have in process. Like we have a bylaw that says, if it's used for a different use than other than residential housing, or if we have a business that somebody takes and buys and changes the usage a bit, there's a process for that. But what maybe we can do, there's people who rent out a cottage for a month at a time, which we read in the report. I have no problem with that. People who rent by a week at a time, I don't really have a problem with that either, because the cost to rent weekly is totally different than the rest. What I see happening in my area where I live, which is a cottage area, they're renting for one night or 2 nights, and it's a party house, it's a party weekend, it's a stagette, it's a stag. So maybe when we send it back to staff, we have a breakdown of the categories. Is this like, I'm sure, Bill, in your area, people have rented cottages for 2 months a year to pay the taxes. We have people that do it for a month while they're away, maybe traveling. And I've done that actually. So maybe staff, we can look at it, break it down into categories, but basically it's the party house that's becoming the problem. I think in the bridle path, you can rent a house, a mansion for $12,000 a night, but they have 10, 12 people, and it's a stag, $1,000 each, it's nothing. And then we've had shootings there. So I think we'll ask staff to break it down into categories, because we don't want to slam everybody with one regulation and say, you can't do it. We can't control that 100% because they'll do it under the table if we do put a fee in place. So then we have more bylaw issues. So I'm going to say send it back to staff. I need someone to follow me on this. Short-term rentals. They're going to come back, but I just want to make sure we look at these 3 categories, possibly under these 3 categories of administrative approach: licensing STRAs, interim control bylaws, and zoning bylaw amendments. And there's a reactive approach like that. Those page 4 and 5 kind of sort of zero out where the problems are. So how best can we work that into? We don't want to have one rule, one system for everything. We have to have some leeway, and I think that deals with our shores, which Mr. Councillor Van Berkel is very familiar with. We've got to have some flexibility here for people to make money, but at the same time stop the party houses. Thank you. So let's get that in.
So while you're devising what you want the recommendation to be, Deputy Mayor, I'll go around and see if there's any other comments.
Sure. Fine.
Councillor Sadi?
Thank you. I think from reading the report and also hearing from residents in our community, it's a concern everywhere. And when you look at it, it's, you know, they're giving examples from Collingwood, you know, in the city of Barrie's talked about that as well. But in this recommendation, it's that staff be directed to report back to council with proposed recommendations after further information through the participation in the County of Simcoe workshop. I'm pleased to say I'm attending that workshop. I got in before. There's a wait list to get in, and I'll be attending that tomorrow. And at that county workshop, that's all the municipalities in the County of Simcoe looking at concerns, the looking at the concerns, the best ways to address, and the practices to regulate the short-term rentals. So we'll be looking at feedback from other communities, municipalities that already have measurements in place and trialed some. So I think that's going to be a great help in that. And from licensing to regulations to bylaws and even zoning for particular areas. So I look forward to that workshop and sharing that information with council, along with staff.
Thank you. Councillor Payne?
I think that's a great, sorry, I think that's a great idea. The only problem I see is there's quite a few of them that are out-of-country owners. So how are we going to be able to manage that when they're out of the country? They've just bought the home just so they can rent it for the weekends for the party homes. And so that's my concern, is getting to the owners that don't live here.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll take that into consideration when coming back with recommendations. Deputy Mayor Davidson?
Just to follow up on what Councillor Asadi was saying, just an example. We have a Airbnb particular place, I won't even say where it is, and it's been turned into a business, believe it or not, as a grow-op. So the municipality's having a really hard time with this particular issue, and again, it's owned offshore. So you can see where Airbnbs are being manipulated for other purposes, and the municipality has no control because grow-ops are a federal jurisdiction. So this is bigger than we think it is. So I want some help with the wording here. I know you're going to county workshop, but I don't, pardon?
So, Councillor or Deputy Mayor, I would suggest that Mr. Parkin had a suggestion.
Sure, thank you, Your Worship. Just in working with staff on reviewing this report, I think their intentions, and hopefully Mr. Scarrett can correct me if I'm wrong, is to, when they report back, speak to each of the options and then propose one option that they think is the best fit for Innisfil. So I think they will address each option and weigh the pros and cons of that.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor, I think tying their hands and telling them which options they can consider is probably not the best approach. What I read, it comforted me when I read the report, because every issue I've heard, every email I've gotten, every person I've talked to is captured in this report. So there was nothing in there that didn't, and it was both the pros and the cons, because this is why it's such a problem, is because you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are people who have been, using short-term rental accommodation, and it works well, and the neighbors don't have a problem, but it's the ones that are a problem that we have to address, and that's always the difficulty in that. So, okay, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. And I think I just wanted to have it out here. A lot of people don't read these reports. They don't go into detail. They don't know what we're doing. And we're constantly getting calls. You're not doing nothing. You're not doing anything. And I love getting the calls on Saturday morning at 7:30. So I think by just speaking about it with Councillor Sadi, her feedback, staff's feedback, the public will be aware that we are working in that direction. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder for that recommendation. All in favor? And there were no changes, no amendments to the recommendation that was printed. All right, and the next one was the Mobility Orbit GO Station Project Manager. That was Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm really torn with this resolution, and I guess maybe it's the contractor in me, which used to really make me mad when I was looking forward to bid on a project and it was given to somebody else without any bids on it. I understand why we're doing this. I totally understand, because it's a time-sensitive thing, and we have worked with Gordon and Gordon before, and they're I have great respect for them. They did a great job for us, and they are certainly able to do the job. But my problem lies when that we have a procedural bylaw that says, we should go out for tender. And we're bypassing that, we're waiving that. And, therein lies my problem. I really think that it should go out for tender. It's a big job, it's a lot of money, and, you know, it's, do I understand why we're doing it? It's like, you know, souls, well, I just have a problem with it, and I'm going to have to vote against it. I leave the recommendation as it is. But
Thank you. Did you want to vote against it, Councillor Van Berkel, or did you want to find another mover and seconder, or did you want to propose a different recommendation?
I understand why we're doing this. I totally understand why I do this. I just want you to understand why I will vote against it.
Understood. So we need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that's on the table. Councillor Nicol
I'll move the recommendation. Just looking for a seconder.
and Deputy Mayor Davidson's the seconder. Any other conversations or questions? Deputy Mayor Davidson.
I second it to get it on the table, but I'd like to call a recorded vote on this, please.
Okay, recorded vote's been called. Mr. Cieo.
Your Worship and members of council, I just wanted to quickly respond to Councillor Van Berkel's comments you know, make clear that we understand council's concern. Our preference as your administration is not to go outside of our procurement bylaw. It is an exception to the process. It's not the general rule. And there are risks, of course, when we do these types of exceptions. We've tried to weigh and put in this staff report the pros and cons of moving ahead with an exception to the process here. With those countervailing risks of a GO train station that design that's rapidly moving forward, and we want to be able to participate as fully as possible. Given that it's not our project, it is a Metrolinx project, and it is a developer-led, designed, and constructed and funded project. So we are an important party, but not we're not in the driver's seat of this project. But we, as council, has approved a very significant vision for the GO train station and the orbit around it. Our recommendation to you, given those very careful weighing of risks, is to move ahead with the recommendation for someone to be at the table during that design process as quickly as possible. And then the broader orbit, certainly we accept Councillors Van Berkel's points, and we'll look to procure as quickly as possible for that larger orbit vision participation. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. And my other comment would we have in the past, we don't make a habit of it, but we have in the past done the same thing. I'll use an example, like when we are purchasing certain equipment and we have, maybe 7 of that type of equipment, we'll sole source that one, so we don't have 2 types of, say, I don't know, grass mowers, and then we've got to carry parts for both those grass mowers. In this particular case, we've had very good success with this particular company in the past, and we need someone on the ground right away because we are going to be going to design and hopefully starting construction in 2021. Any other comments? Councillor Water.
Just a question to Mr. Rayner. Could we not in future have companies like this on retainer so that there is a procurement process that they're on retainer for 5 years? And I just, for future, because we are in between a rock and a hard place, and I agree with Bill that, this is something we shouldn't be doing and making a habit of, and it's obviously we don't make a habit of it, but it certainly puts us in an uncomfortable position. But I understand the timelines, and so I just wanted to ask that question. Thank you.
Mr. Rayner.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. I think it's a great suggestion, Councillor Waters, and something that I think as we look to advance large infrastructure projects, the ability to be able to quickly call upon qualified and in fact pre-qualified experts is a great suggestion, one that we actually use in, for example, the legal department, where we have pre-qualified experts depending on the specific subject matter we're looking for assistance on. So certainly the growth team will take that back and we'll look at pre-qualification for this kind of skill set. It's a very valuable skill set, and in today's labor market, project managers of this skill set are actually quite difficult to find. So it's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parkin. Is that something we should be adding to the recommendation, or can we just give that staff to take for direction to report back? Is that okay, Councillor? Okay, great suggestion. Okay, any others, comments, questions? Okay, we've got a recorded vote. Mr. Parkin.
Thank you, Your Worship. We haven't had a recorded vote since our procedural bylaw was changed last fall. So we've put the names through randomizer, so the order will be different each time. So I'll call out the member's name, and if you could say for or against. Councillor Orsatti.
For.
Councillor Van Berkel.
Against.
Councillor Waters.
For.
Councillor Ices.
For.
Deputy Mayor Davidson. Councillor Payne.
Against.
Councillor Fowler.
Against.
Mayor Dolan.
In favor.
Councillor Nicol.
In favor.
And that is 5-4, that's carried.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is F2, and that was Councillor Ices, I believe. Wasn't it? Who wanted the Onion Fest? Yeah, Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Worship. I have Councillor Orsatti as my seconder. Again, I don't have anything to change or challenge in this pulling this item. I just wanted to highlight the great work that Ice Corp is doing in our community, always keeping things new and fresh, and also making it the event even more indicative of our town, as we know we grow really good onions in Innisfil. So it's great to see this come forward, and I'm definitely in favor of this event. So.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Orsatti.
Thank you. Since Councillor Ices has pulled it, I'll make some comments as well. That I really like the fact that, and I'm sure Council does as well, that on this 200th anniversary of Innisfil, that Ice Corp is making this multicultural celebration. So I look forward to the different events that you're going to have to help celebrate that. And, you know, when you first look at it, you think Onion, they've had Rib Fest, but there's a lot of communities that have Rib Fests. And what better time than on our 200th anniversary to birthday than to celebrate one of the largest crop producing things of our Innisfil farmers, but onions. So why not? And I look forward to a blooming onion at the festival. And congratulations on your 25th year of giving back to the community for every event for the benefit of the residents. So thank you very much. And I understand that you have a whole new executive, so congratulations to that as well.
Thank you. I look forward to a lot of watery eyes on that weekend. All in favor of the recommendation? That's carried. The rise recommendation is moved by Councillor Payne and Councillor Dickel. All those in favor? That's carried. And our consideration of adoption is moved by Councillor Fowler and Councillor Orsatti. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Now we'll get to our a motion of which notice was previously provided. Councillor Ices. Do you have a seconder? Do you want to speak to it, Councillor?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have Deputy Mayor Davidson as my seconder. It's just something that kind of struck me as we move through this 200th birthday of Innisfil, and thinking about some of the many things that make our community special, and how do we acknowledge those accomplishments. And so I know other communities have a sports hall of fame. Sports is a really great thing that pulls our communities together. It gets us excited about ourselves, and also involves everyone. It's not just the athletes, it's the coaches, it's the mentors, it's the sponsors. And on my short term in council, in this room we've recognized a lot of these athletes who have gone on and done wonderful things nationally and internationally. So I thought that maybe we could organize this in a special way and tie that in with our 200th birthday. So those are the reasons behind the motion, and I look forward to staff coming back with some ideas on that, best practices and whatnot. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have our Manager of Leisure Services here who's listening very carefully. And do you have any comments you'd like to make, Ms. Ford?
This is totally in line with our community programming moving forward into the next budget. So it's perfect timing. I've done some preliminary searches and it looks great. We've got a lot of opportunities. So I'm happy to bring back a staff report with some recommendations and some costs that are probably going to be related. But I've also looked at some possible areas that we can put such a great Hall of Fame for our community. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from council? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just kind of curious, is that it's an opportunity to, I think, recognize a lot of people. So could we broaden it to kind of a Citizens Hall of Fame in terms of not only sports? Because there's a lot of important people that I think we should recognize maybe at this time. So is it an opportunity to maybe broaden it and recognize all those people? Just a thought. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Davidson.
Thank you. I understand where Councillor Waters is going, but I think Citizens Awards versus Sports Awards are two different categories where it gets maybe thinned out a little more. When Councillor Isis mentioned this to me a couple of weeks ago, I thought it was fantastic. For somebody who moved to Innisfil like myself 40 years ago, I was amazed at how many, and still over the years, how many rinks we've built, how many soccer fields, how many parks we've enhanced for baseball. So sports plays a totally different role from citizens who do things. I know the federal government has awards for citizens and recognition for citizens who do above and beyond their duty. But I really think a sports hall of fame is, to Innisfil, is, for me, and I don't get excited that often about things, but I really am excited about the Sports Hall of Fame for Innisfil. I think it's kind of something unique, and it stands on its own. Instead of trying to homogenize everything, let's have some distinction, and I like to stick it to sports. Thanks.
And I would just comment that we have our Innisfil Arts, Culture, and Heritage Committee, and the library, and they have like awards for artists and writers, and we have our volunteer awards for our volunteer committees. So we do have a number of those. Mr. Rayner?
Your worship, members of council, I just wanted to add, as this goes live to the community, assuming it's adopted today, we are interested in anyone who's interested in sponsorship and happy to have those conversations as we consider bringing this information back to council. Thank you, worship.
That was a great PSA. Any other comments or questions before I call the vote? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. Is notice of motion notice was previously given as Councillor Nickel.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Waters. If I could just speak to it for a second. I first sat on the NVCA board back in 2014 until we downsized that board to achieve procedural and financial efficiencies. Right now at the NVCA, 18 towns and municipalities are doing the heavy lifting financially. We are the communities impacted by the environmental changes caused by the development, and we are the ones who benefit from the great work of the CAs. This motion to me is not about workloads, quicker permits, efficiencies, or rubber stamping development. It is about general support for the work that our CAs do. To suggest downloading those services that the CAs provide would be detrimental to all communities, including Innisfil, both financially and physically. These boards oversee entire watersheds, and to think that one town could be making independent decisions without considering the impact to the entire watershed, both upstream and downstream, is of great concern to me. Truthfully, there could be a few more pages of this motion, but we definitely would get so bogged down that the entire essence of this motion would be lost. So to summarize, my motion is to show town support for the CAs, to ask the province to define services and funding models, and also to address prone areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Hearing or seeing none. I'll point out that there's been, what's prompted this for members of the public would wonder why all of a sudden we're doing this right now is because the Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks is doing a review of conservation authorities. And so there's a number of municipalities across Simcoe County who have been forwarding motions both to the county and to the area MPs and MPPs on their thoughts of how conservation authorities support their municipalities. And you know, they're all different. There seems to be a different scale. And it doesn't seem to be whether you're upstream or downstream. I guess it depends, and a lot of it also depends on what conservation authority you're in. Some have a lot more resources and are able to do a lot more than others, and I think that speaks to a broader thing. But we're going to, we wanted to be one to show our voice on what this council's recommendation was going forward. So, all in favor of the recommendation? Opposed, if any? That's carried unanimously. Okay, next is a notice of motion for Councillor Ices. And Councillor Ices, were you looking to waive notice or were you wanting to just give notice tonight?
Thank you, Worship. I wanted to have this brought forward tonight as as you mentioned, the review that is happening by the province. I believe the comment period ends this week, so I apologize for not having this in the normal procedure, but as our discussions around conservation authorities in this review evolved, we got to the point where I wanted to address some of the needs of our rural areas, and that's what this motion speaks to. So if that's what's required to deal with this tonight, I would ask for the waiver of that.
Okay, according to our procedural bylaw, Councillor, we need 2/3 majority in order to waive notice to hear this tonight. So I'll be calling whether or not Council is in favor of waiving notice and allowing this to be considered tonight. Those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, Councillor, you're looking a little confused. Did you hear me?
I did hear you. I was just, sorry, Your Worship, I did hear you. I was just trying to think what the rush was to have it tonight.
Councillor Ices?
So the review period that the province is accepting comments on conservation authorities, it ends this week, I believe. And so that's partly why a lot of municipalities are putting similar motions forward as Councillor Nickel has done. this is just something that deals with the rural nature of our town.
Okay, and you know what? I think it passed with 2/3 even without your hand. So notice has been waived. So Councillor Ices, do you have a seconder?
Thank you, Worship. Deputy Mayor Davidson is my seconder.
Did you have any further comments?
As you mentioned, it's quite an extensive review that's being done. There's been many meetings across the province. There's a lot of stakeholders that are asked to comment on the roles of conservation authorities. And as it was mentioned here, the conservation authorities act differently in different areas, which relates to the different geography, the different wetlands, but it also causes some concerns, some issues that we wanted to improve for farmers, for landowners in rural areas, and that's where I speak about some of the frustration that farmers can have with inconsistencies about definitions of what a watercourse is, what a wetland is, and this motion would ask the Ministry of the Environment to clarify some of those frustrations, some of those terms, so that farmers know how it relates to their lands.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this motion? Councillor Waters?
I would like to ask some clarification from Councillor Ices in terms of what are the issues around the definitions of watercourses and wetlands and interference in wetlands that seem to be the issue with farmers. So if you could maybe just provide some information on that, it'd be helpful.
Councillor Ices.
Yeah, certainly. So the definitions that are causing the frustration, a lot of it is with what's allowed to happen on things that are dedicated as watercourses and wetlands, and the definition of what that is. If you look on a lot of the mapping software that we see, there's unevaluated wetlands, which a lot of it is that information on those software maps are historical. They haven't been ground proofed. So the definition of wetlands in agriculture, it's very important because we can, water is not conducive to growing crops when it's in excess, as a wetland is, but with technology these days, we can, the Drainage Act allows farmers to drain the lands that they own. So that's where some of these definitions are important, and that's where some of the inconsistencies are, where one conservation authority will rule a certain way on what a wetland is and what you can do in it, and it's different in another. So those are some of the concerns from the agricultural group that is commenting on this review.
Councillor Waters.
This is kind of where I have a bit of issue with this, is because unevaluated wetlands are just wetlands which haven't gone through the process of putting a formal title on them yet. And in many cases are valuable wetlands. And we have several of those in Innisfil, especially the North Innisfil area. And so I'd be quite concerned, because right now in Ontario, we've eliminated like 77% of all wetlands in Ontario. And most of that has gone through to urbanization and farming. And if this is an opportunity to allow farms to take unevaluated wetlands and all of a sudden drain them, I would have a serious issue with that, because we should be in the business of establishing new wetlands, which we're trying to do with the green infrastructure project in South Innisfil. I can't imagine I could support something that is going to allow that type of thing to happen when we've already lost most of the wetlands in Ontario already. And this is what I'm concerned about. Wetlands there are a whole variety of different types of wetlands that are out there, and Ducks Unlimited and the conservation authorities are really quite good at identifying what wetlands and what aren't wetlands. And if it wasn't for the CA identifying the Turome areas as being wetlands, they would have just said, well, there's hardly any water there. We should be allowed to develop it. So I think it's critical, and I think wetlands are really quite important in Innisfil, and I think Ontario. So I'm really quite concerned with this change.
Deputy Mayor Davidson. No, go ahead.
Wetlands have a point system that are registered to them. I think it's 15. When it drops below 15, then it is no longer a wetland. And I think that criteria is pretty strict. If you're talking with Ducks Unlimited, when I dealt with them years ago, hunting was our biggest enemy about deregulation of wetlands, because when you remove hunting from a wetland area, you automatically, I think, is removed 3 demerit points are removed. So hunting is something that we kept in Innisfil to stop the erosion of our wetlands. I think from the agricultural standpoint, they have a reason to keep that land or redesignate that land for the benefit of farming, which is something we have to keep in focus in Innisfil, in rural Ontario. And I think that's where Councillor Isis is heading.
Councillor Isis? Well, we're not going to ping pong all night, okay? I'm just saying. It's 9:45, so we'll debate a little longer, and then I'll call a vote.
Thank you, Worship. I would like to respond to Councillor Waters' comments, and I think it spells it out right in the first whereas, where farmers are environmentalists, and to equate using wetlands that haven't been determined to be wetlands and using them as land that can produce food, fiber, fuel. We're also not taking into account all the environmental things that farmers provide when they farm their land, whether it's nutrient site, the list is there. And as a farmer, it is frustrating to listen to all the wonderful things that conservation authorities do, but to know that the vast majority of the land that is in the watershed is farmed, and it's farmed well. There's all sorts of management practices that have evolved over time, and we are farming better for the environment than we ever have. We don't get credit for carbon sequestration in our soils when we use no-till practices. We don't get credit for the cover cropping that protects the soils when to keep the soil from going into the watershed. All these things that farmers do, I find they're not appreciated, and so I guess that's where I would differ in my comments. That just because the land is being farmed, it's not an environmental negative. In fact, it's quite the opposite.
Councillor Waters?
I agree, we shouldn't go back and forth, but I should mention to Deputy Mayor that I worked for Ducks Unlimited for 2 years. I was a national education coordinator, so I'm well aware of what wetlands are and what the evaluation process is for them. I'm just saying that they are seriously in jeopardy in Ontario, and that they need to be maintained and enhanced from where they are. And hunting is a serious. I was one of the few people who came from the education field and supported DU when they're hunting. Ducks Unlimited Canada is a strong conservation organization, and hunting is part of it. And I am full for that because they're good managers of what they do. Also, I'll say that I'm the only one here that probably has a sticker on the window in support of farmers. In terms of, and Kevin realized that when I first became a councillor, I was one of the first few people who did that. So I am a strong supporter of farmers. I know where our food comes from. I am just a strong advocate for environmental issues, and I know that some of the practices that Innisfil farmers are practicing. And I've been to Kevin's. I went to the egg farm. I went to the tour. So I appreciate all that. I just, we've worked long and hard to protect wetlands, and any changes in terms of that puts those in jeopardy, I would strongly oppose, and for that reason, I have to disagree with this motion.
If I could just offer one comment, if you read the motion, it doesn't say, all it says is be consistent. If you do it in Rattlesnake and you do it in Grand, do it in Lake Simcoe. That's what I'm reading. If I'm reading it wrong, let me know. But it's what I'm saying is it's saying just treat us all the same. Councillor Waters.
I'll just say that every single conservation authority is different. That's what makes them so unique, is that they have slightly different priorities in terms of how they operate. Every conservation authority comes from the community. It's a community initiative, and so everyone will be slightly different based on what their water structure is, what their land structure is. So they may treat them slightly differently for that reason, because they are unique. They are not all the same. Their mandate is the same. However, they can prioritize different aspects of what they do. So I think they reflect the communities that they're in, and that's why that difference might occur. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call the vote. I just want to say before that, I love the passion at this table. This is why we sit here till 10 to 10 at night and debate wetlands, but I think it's wonderful. Mr. Rayner.
Your worship, members of council, I just might note that the ministry is accepting comments from individuals, organizations. We are already going to be providing a number of different letters to the minister. The deputy mayor's motion from last meeting, there's already been one approved today, so there'll be several correspondence going into the ministry, I suspect, on this topic.
All right, all in favor? Those opposed? 2 opposed, that's carried. And finally, any announcements? Announcements? Councillor Nicol?
Thank you, Worship. Very quickly, just a reminder, tomorrow at the Leafroy Legion, 6:30 p.m., 100 men that give a damn. Bring $100, sit for an hour, listen to 3 charities, and donate your money. Also, last Saturday, toured Cooks Bay Marina along with the MPP Kanjan, Deputy Mayor Davidson, Councillor Fowler. The owners took us out ice fishing and around the place, and just for the record, I caught many more perch than the rest of the elected officials. That's it.
But we didn't see any, Councillor Nicol. Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to thank our staff and the boys that were out there on time with their pumps. And they were ahead of the weather, and they did a great job. They worked all night last night. They saw and anticipated the bad weather, and they were right on the ball. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Waters, any announcements? Councillor Payne? No? Deputy Mayor Davidson.
Thank you. I had an opportunity to attend a hockey tournament on Big Bay Point last week, raised by some local residents, and it was really unique. There were 4 ice rinks, not made to Olympic standards or municipal standards that we'd have to deal with. Their hockey nets were recycled pallets, and it was just great to see 60 to 80 people out there, paramedics, firemen, all playing hockey, having a great time. Members of the community gathered, members you never see all winter long. So I just want to say to the residents of Big Bay Point, the Saunders and them who put this on, thank you very much. It was really appreciated. Thank you.
Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to report back about the great opening of our very first art gallery, which is in Stroud. The B Contemporary Art Gallery. It's in the old medical building, and it was the grand opening was scheduled on the Friday of the big storm that we had. So it got pushed to Sunday, which I think actually helped it because the gallery was just packed, and there was just a wonderful feel to that event. And I know a lot of council members were at that, so that was great to support that. The other thing I wanted to report on is that Councillor Van Berkel, Councillor Waters, and Councillor Orsatti and I participated in the municipal curling bonspiel last week. We had a wonderful time. We've got third place, so we did Innisfil proud, and it was great to talk with other municipal cohorts and learn what's going on in different parts of the county. So that was very enjoyable. Next year we'll do better.
I just want to tell you, I'm still stiff.
Councillor Sadi.
Just wanted to remind residents about the great activities during March break being held at all the libraries. So drop in, pick up a flyer, go online, check it out, and fully packed week and lots of opportunities from young children to youth to the teens and even for the adults. So stop by, you'll be impressed.
Councillor Fowler? Thanks. I just want to thank the group that went to the County of Simcoe curling bonspiel, and let you know that our thoughts are with Councillor John O'Donnell. John O'Donnell's the Deputy Mayor of Ramera. He's at Simcoe Hospice right now and still seeing visitors, but he has won the bonspiel every year that I can remember and marched into council with the big trophy every year. So it was a sad moment this year when he wasn't able to attend. And my only other comment would be that the first inaugural visit of the 100 Women Who Care, not to be outdone by Councillor Nicol, was last week, and the winning recipient of the funds was the Innisfil Christmas for Kids. So, and they're looking for more members. And with seeing no more announcements, any announcements for the good of the corporation?
Your worship, members of council, we don't normally advertise private businesses, but I would note that if you wander through Rizzardo right now, you'll find that there are some more food options there, so check it out. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Confirming bylaw is moved by Councillor Fowler, seconded by Councillor Ices. All those in favor? That's carried. And adjournment is Councillor Nicol. We couldn't adjourn last week, last meeting, Councillor Nicol, because you weren't here. And Councillor Van Berkel. All those in favor? That's carried. And I remind council, we still have more work to do, so we're moving back into finish our closed session, so no rest for the wicked. And I'd like to wish all of those in the audience a wonderful March break, and hope you have a wonderful time with the family.